welcome back to Reasoned Answers.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Welcome to today's show. Today we're going to be discussing the Hajj. And we've titled the episode, Is Allah a Moon God? There certainly are plenty of people out there who will say that Allah is a moon god. Very often, they have totally nonsensical reasons for saying this, or I guess they technically make sense, but they certainly don't hold up to scrutiny. And I don't want to associate with the kinds of people that are just saying that Allah is a moon god because they look and they see a crescent moon symbol and they reach a conclusion based on that. However, there is actually something to this. Even if these people didn't have any solid reason for saying that, there is something to it because Allah, it turns out, is kind of amalgamation of all the gods of Arabia, including those of the moon. Welcome back, Mary. You want to say a couple words of intro?
No, that pretty much sums it up, that we are looking into how Allah does connect to moon gods historically, and how the god for whom the Kaaba was built was indeed a moon god, and that identity was assigned to Allah, and then Muhammad was like, no, these things about Allah, they're just not true, so like don't pay attention to them, even though this is entirely a pagan site with pagan beliefs behind it. And the Hajj itself shows all of these pagan origins and these lunar connections. So first, we're going to have a funny video that I found today about another tradition in Islam that is interestingly nocturnal as well, but specifically the Ramadan. So we can just go right into that.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll start with something fun, not directly related, but always good to start on a light note.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
مرحبا وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا شيخ اليوم بالغلط وقع في تمي شاورما مع زيادة طحينية.
نعم.
وكمان قطعة تفاح وتقريبا 3 لتر مي. فمش عارف هل أكمل صيامي ولا أطعمني الله وسقاني.
So what do you think? How plausible is this? That he fell down and food and water fell into his mouth, accidentally breaking the fast.
3 liters of water. 3
yeah,
liters.
3 liters. 3 liters.
But Allah has fed him. So he's trying to play it off as if he hasn't actually broken the fast. That, I didn't choose to break the fast. Rather, instead, it was, it just happened to be that way. It just happened to fall apart like that. I just died when I saw that, because the expression on the imam's face too, because at first it's like, okay, you're saying that you accidentally broke your fast in like a convoluted way, right? But then he's like, and an apple and 3 liters of water, and then he's like, did Allah feed me? It's like, no, you liar. So.
Absolutely. So I'll put a link to that. I meant to do it before we went live, but I'll get a link. I do want to give credit where credit is due. Someone obviously spent some time putting that skit together after seeing that humorous actual clip of a Muslim calling in to ask the Sheikh a question and then being dumbfounded in response, like, I don't know what to say to this idiot calling in now.
Because especially with this with shame culture, like you get the kind of westernized chest thumping Muslims, but you're really not supposed to like go, yeah, I think you're full of it. You can say that in Western culture, and in westernized Eastern people, you get that. But you don't get that same sort of thing whenever you're supposed to be kind of on the same side like that. It's very funny. Yes, yeah, the words were matching the subtitles. They were correctly subtitled. I believe.
All right. Yeah, I have no
Is-
reason
is
to doubt it.
I only could recognize a couple of words, but they were the same of the couple I could recognize. Because remember, I do most of my stuff just reading, right?
Yeah, hearing a language and reading a language are very different. So, all right. So, did you want to dive right into the presentation then?
Yes, we can do that. I should actually share my screen. That will make it much easier for you to see
Yeah,
what I am
It would
doing.
be a bit helpful, a bit helpful.
All right.
All right.
So we're
Oh, and by the way, all the internet issues should be cleared up. So fingers crossed on that.
yeah. So the question is, what about this moon stuff? Because it is transparently obvious, like the most casual viewer, that Islam, for not having any icons and being an aniconic religion, sure does have a lot of crescent moons, and that makes you think that there would be something to that. That would be your intuitive position. And before we do that, we're going to cover a couple of arguments we got in the last one, that the idea that any god could be called Allah because Allah means al-ilah. So because the etymology of the word just means the god, it could be any god. So I would like you to ask your Muslim friends, oh, so you can call Krishna Allah. That's fine. And they will go, no, you can't do that. So you can call the kitchen god of the Chinese. That's Allah, right? That's going to work, right? And they will go, no, you can't do that. No, they only want to use Allah for the God of Abraham. Very, very curious that they are not interested in using Allah for all the rest of the goddess of tangled kitchen utensils of Terry Pratchett. No, they would not be okay. Well, while technically, yes, it does have a generic origin, and those who were pushing for a syncretic kind of identity later on were using this. They were using the fact that it has this etymology. That doesn't mean that the etymology determines its actual meaning. For example, Allah almost certainly came about as a parallel of Allat, right? So the female was already in use. Allat was a very important goddess. Allah was much less important. And Allat referred to one particular goddess, even though it literally meant at the time the goddess. It's a little bit complicated because it's come from an earlier form of the female word for goddess before Arabic took the type of feminine ending that it has now. But it just means the goddess. But it refers to one specific goddess. It refers to the equivalent of Asherah once Al-Uzza and Allat got divided again. It only referred to one. And Al-Uzza also is essentially the equivalent of Al-Aziz, which is a name of Allah. Well, if you're saying that it actually means the same thing, why can't we just call Allah Al-Uzza? Is that okay? No, it's not, because Al-Uzza meant the Venusian goddess, right? It meant one particular goddess. Allat meant the mother goddess, who is sometimes called Shams too, and as kind of a title, meaning the sun. And Al-Uzza was the Venusian goddess, the Venus goddess, and no one else. So Allah was put in lists of specific deities. So you'd say like, I want rain, like so-and-so, son of so-and-so, upon this occasion, when the rains were withheld, plead for rain from, and it would be like Dushara, Allah, Allat, and Al-Uzza, right? So it could be in a list. That requires you knowing who you're talking about. That has to be one specific individual in this list. So Allah became the title for the high pagan deity of a specific pantheon. He was Allah because he was the god who had three daughters, Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. So that's the only reason that he's Allah. He is they're the three daughters of Allah, and therefore Allah is the god who has the three daughters. That's what it meant in the context in which the word developed and originated. So in this same system, the high god is also the moon god, not because the high god belongs to the moon or literally is the body that is circulating up there, but rather because moonness is appropriate to the high god. So Allah is transferable insofar as our national god is the high god of the moon, who is the father of Allah, Al-Uzza, and Manat is transferable. So rival systems laid claim to this identity for their own particular national high god. But Allah is not transferable insofar as applying to any god who does not have originally 2, later 3 daughters, and who is not a high god of a pagan system. So it is a specific role, a hole that is Allah-shaped that Allah must occupy. That's one of the reasons that the people in Mecca so opposed Muhammad. And that's because Muhammad wanted to say that Allah doesn't have daughters. And they're like, what do you mean? He's only Allah because he does have daughters, right? So it's very important to realize this reality.
And
So
Muslims implicitly acknowledge this because they don't go around just saying, I praise God or something like that, or everyone should worship God. They always say Allah, regardless of what language they speak. You know, if they speak French, they say Allah. If they speak English, they say Allah. If they speak Arabic, they say Allah, and which is how names behave. Names generally are pretty similar from language to language. Ordinary nouns are not.
right. So this is kind of the context in which this emerged. It makes absolutely no sense to go, oh, well, because it has its etymology, it could be anything. Well, no, it can't. So there is additional evidence of Hubal as Baal. Now, I did actually make one mistake in my previous stream. I was
What?
Yes, I know.
How dare
Occasionally,
you?
I'm a human being. Occasionally, I make mistakes. The center letter is not a hamza. It is in fact an ayn. And so the issue is not about the hamza dropping out, but the ayn, which is like partway between a vowel and a consonant. It's really weird letter. Anyway, the way it behaves in the system, and that there is not a documented phonological systematic change for the ayn to change into an ah sound. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. In fact, it happened multiple times that we know of. There are bells and balls, B-O-L, balls, that who came from Baal, but it is not because of the Hijazi dialect that this happened. I did just put, thankfully, it was a particular article was by Timothy W. Duncan, has been reproduced on the Answering Islam blog, and I put a link to that. It was actually the responses of who was it? Anyway, it was the responses that I had read separately on a different site that I wasn't paying attention to, and I was responding to from memory. My memory was not perfect. I should have gone back and checked, and I didn't because I couldn't remember exactly where it was. So
I did pin that link if anyone wants to check that out. And Freed from Islam says, eek, she's human. And this is the first time we've had any evidence of that. Mary always impresses so much we forget that she's capable of making a mistake.
But what was funny is that Muslim did appropriately push back, but he also very appropriately called anyone who would say that Rahman was from a root that inherently meant womb that became applied to mercy, that this person was ignorant, did not know Arabic, did not know Semitic languages, and that they are stupid. And he didn't realize that that's what he was calling his prophet, because it wasn't me who said that, it was Muhammad who said that. And I, on the other hand, was trying to say that Muhammad made these folk etymologies that make no sense. There we go. That make no sense. And so he ended up insulting his prophet, post after post, he eventually realized that he was insulting his prophet, and then he tried to delete all his posts. I'm like, no. You don't get to stay here if you're only going to keep the things where you're insulting me and not your prophet. You need to go now. So if you want
that was
me,
some
that's
good
fine.
fun.
But if you're insulting your prophet, you have to keep that up too. So
yeah, that was definitely some good fun where he's like, you'd have to be a complete idiot. You don't know anything about Arabic. And didn't realize what you were saying was he missed, apparently. You did say it in the stream, but apparently he missed it. That you were talking about Muhammad's theory. And he's like, this is the stupidest thing ever. And I'm like, you're insulting your prophet. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm insulting Mary.
And then he
and then he
eventually
figured it out.
Frantically deleted it, and I'm like, no, we're not playing that game. So, another important, something that Patricia Crona was wrong about a lot of things, but one thing that she did point out is that the story of there being 360 idols in the Kaaba has to be a lie, because there is no record of any such temple that existed anywhere. A temple was always built for one particular god, and that particular god might have associating beings and helpers and whatever else, but that particular structure was for that one god, not for a whole bunch of gods. And so, and I went back and I looked at the sources that described where idols were, and the only ones that they could come up with were idols that were in around the Kaaba. But whenever there were multiple descriptions of when they opened up the Kaaba, when Muhammad came to destroy all the idols, and in the interior of the Kaaba, there was only one statue, and it was of Hubal. So Hubal was the god of the Kaaba. There were many paintings. It seems like they went to every church garage sale possible to get many different icons of every single prophet that they could and put it up in there, because the Kaaba at this point seemed to be a weird pseudo imitation of a Byzantine church. That's why it had the goofy half circle in the back that nobody could figure out what it's for. They just couldn't figure out how to enclose that because they didn't have the architectural skills when they went to put a roof on it. So they left it open. But that is almost certainly attempting to mimic a Byzantine church as well. But
and we're proud of that.
Indeed, they were very proud of all of the icons they got. And the other thing that they got in there that was significant was a set of ram's horns, and ram's horns had become a symbol of Baal in the Levant shortly before the founding of Carthage, was associated with one aspect of Baal. We do have a clear indication of the influence of the Eastern Semitic languages through the word Rahman, which was originally from Akkadian and Eastern dialects of Semitic things. It's possible that Baal came through contact with the East and then came to Syria and then came to the South. It's certainly its most direct ancestor is going to be our buddies in Nabatea. So all the experts and the philologists connect it to our buddy Hubal, who was in Nabatea, but how that form arrived may have had some Eastern Semitic influence either in the South or whenever the predecessor of Hubal was in Aswan, or it may have occurred in the North. Those are possibilities. It's also very
real quick
important.
Comment here from KL. Someone should do a mini documentary on the original 100% Pagan Hajj. And that's why I brought it up. I was going to say, is that what we're doing today, perhaps, Mary?
Yeah, that is most of what we are doing today. So there are 0 times that Muhammad tells the Quraysh to stop worshiping Hubal. Now, the physical idol, yes, get rid of that physical idol. It needs to be destroyed. But Hubal is never rejected by Muhammad as a god in a single hadith. We do have an Ibn Ishaq. We do have him kind of throw into the mouth of the pagans that they like Hubal. They're Hubal better than Allah, but it doesn't fit. That there's like 2 instances where this is kind of shoved in sideways, but it doesn't, probably because he realized that it's really awkward that that's supposed to be the high god, and yet nobody ever talks about him. They only talk about his 3 daughters all the time. But again, that's because Allah really was the name of Hubal. And the name Hubal had largely already been buried in use because they were trying to do this Allah forward paganism as a rival to monotheism by using a name that is more neutral sounding. They're like, oh, it's totally legitimate to come over here and come to our pagan temple and worship him. It's totally fine. And their God, totally, that's Allah too. They might not ever use that word, but it is. And again, in the theophoric names, there is not one single theophoric name that uses the name Hubal. Instead, he is always called Allah in the theophoric names, so meaning like the servant of so-and-so. You have the servant of everybody else, but not Hubal. Why not? Because he is called Allah in these theophoric names. So I'm not arguing that Hubal ever had the name Baal to the people in Mecca. The Meccans had no idea that these gods are connected. But Muhammad should know. Muhammad ought to know where Hubal comes from, that he comes from Baal, and he should know that Hubal is a pagan god and shouldn't be called Allah and should fuss at people about that. But it's very evident that he doesn't know the name Baal because he copies the Jewish sources by having Elijah say to the children of Israel, do you invoke Baals and you forsake the best of the creators? So this is usually mistranslated as a proper name, but it's indefinite, not definite. You would expect all Baal if it's the name title of a god. Just like Allah is Allah, you would expect the to still be there. The only reason that would fall out, if you go to the Hebrew, Baal is is called the Baal. He's not called just Baal except in our translations because of how we translate it. So in the Semitic language, you would expect him to still be called the master, not just because otherwise it would be not a proper name. So it is true that you can have nunation to show accusative with proper names, but you need the for Baal in the context of the Semitic language itself. So there is a specific grammatical reason here that you would absolutely expect this to be an indefinite reference, not an accusative nunation, old-fashioned trying to be fancy pants. So if anybody tells you, well, there's, as someone tried to, the same guy tried to say, oh, well, whenever they talk about Lut, it's Lutan. Well, that's, again, a grammatical issue that does not take away from the fact that there is no definite article, and for Baal's particular name, for it to be referring to the Baal that we think of, you would need that definite article. So Muhammad never tells the Quraysh that they should leave off worshipping either Baal or Hubal. He never makes the connection between the two. Allah should know. So Allah should know that whenever Elijah says, why are you invoking your Baals, or what do you invoke Baals and forsake the best of creators? If anybody knows who this best of, who these Baals are, that it is Hubal, like, Allah should know that and say something about it, or tell the people of the Quraysh not to say it. But this just shows the ignorance of Muhammad. It doesn't show that this is not, that Hubal doesn't come from Baal. The commentaries confirm that this Baal isn't connected to Hubal in the minds of the commentators, so they don't know that this connection exists. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that they don't know the history of this figure that they've been worshiping all along. So will you call upon Baal and to forsake the best of creators? And again, it's deliberately mistranslated here. Whoops. So Ibn Abbas, etc., and a whole bunch of people just say Baal means Lord or Master or whatever. Yeah, that's fine. Some of them say this is the language of the people of Yemen. No, it's not. Like, they have no idea where it's from. According to another quote, and the reason that it is a little bit significant that it says that this is the language of the people of Yemen is because this particular form of the name, Baal, actually, that is in Hubal, shows up in Yemen, but this form never shows up in Yemen. It's kind of funny. According to another report, it's the language of another odd particular tribe. And then they say, oh, it's the name of an idol that was worshipped by a particular people of a city west of Damascus. Another one says it's an idol. So again, they associate it with physical idols. And whenever Elijah's talking to the people and he's saying, do you invoke these Baals? He is referring to gods who are worshipped through idols in a generic sense. When in that section of the Bible, they're called Baals, all the pagan deities, because the worship of Baal is so common. But the connection isn't really being made here because of the ignorance of Muhammad and the ignorance of Allah, who's just Muhammad talking. So
such a shame that they don't know anything.
Yeah.
I did have a quick comment here, which I have not seen someone do this before, but I like it. Plagiarism, copy and paste call. I like the play on words there. And then a super chat from Jack Ray.
Sir, how can we contribute financially for your organization? They get in touch with me. And very easy, people know where I am. And once they get in touch with me, to contribute without causing problem, to contribute in big amounts. And many people call me for lunch and for dinner and for meal, and for every meal they give big amounts, alhamdulillah. So those who really want to contribute, they come and meet me.
So Faker Naik would like you to have lunch, dinner, meals, and every meal with him so you can contribute big amounts. Thank you for that donation.
Okay, so I had a request last time to address, because I addressed the fact that Iya, as transliterated in the Egyptological, a lot of sources, is not Allah. So now I have to actually also address that Iya is not connected to Yahweh in any way, and it's not the Yah of Yahweh. It has no relation to it. And in this case, I think that people who use this incredibly stupid argument for Allah being connected to Iya kind of deserve an equally stupid argument, but both of them are wrong. So this is one that apparently Muslims are deciding to use, that because sometimes Iya is even transliterated as YAH, that it's connected to the first syllable in Yahweh. Well, the Egyptological transliteration, the official one, is shown in the kind of J half circle and an H with a dot underneath it, right? And the question is, how should this even be pronounced? Is it connected at all? Well, first of all, it is the wrong language, and I wrote Wong, but it's
wrong.
So Yahweh is an entire word. It has an actual meaning, and it is not a word in or from Egyptian. Has no Egyptian meaning. Iya, as it is written often, is often it just means moon in Egyptian and has no connection whatsoever to Yahweh, right? It's also the wrong sounds. The first letter may in fact have been a y as in yes, or it could have been a duh. They're not sure, and it depends on the context of the actual word as to which sound it would have. The second letter is similar to ein, and the ein is not equivalent to the Semitic ah sound. You have to have some sort of process or something that would change it. But the third letter is the fricative H, which is equivalent to a Hebrew heth, not a Hebrew he. And so they're totally different letters and totally different sounds. So they're not at all the same letters. So you'd have to switch out 2 letters, one of which would be extremely, extremely unlikely to undergo any sort of change anyway. But there's also the fact that Yahweh has a meaning in Hebrew, and that meaning relates specifically to God's explanation of who he is. It's the causative of the word to be. So it is not only that God is the one who is, as he explains, it's also that he's the one who makes be in an absolute sense. All that is what he has caused to be, right? So it's the causative being, essentially. So this moon syllable being associated with that would be entirely and completely out of left field. It would be totally random. It's at the level of saying that, sun and sun, the sun in the sky and the son of man have the same sound in English, therefore it's related in Hebrew. No, they're different languages. They have different sources. They have different meanings, totally unconnected, right? So, and there's an additional problem that Islam confirms that many prophets have theophoric names that end in Yah, that they take the same prophets from Judaism and say, oh, these are our prophets too. So if you're going to go, oh, well, that's a pagan god's name, then you're saying that all of your prophets were prophets of a pagan god. Do you really want to do this, Muslims? This is a particularly stupid argument, and it puts you in a particularly stupid position. Don't say that. The Semitic god of the moon was actually Sin. And again, to play on words, is that English sin? Is it the same thing just because it sounds the same? No, it's not. There are coincidences across languages frequently. So moon in Hebrew has its own meaning or has its own word. And if there had been any desire to make this a god of the moon, then they would have used the Hebrew word for it. They would not have borrowed from Egyptian. Semitic words are based on trilateral roots, and it only has the first letter that's in common with Yahweh. It is not at all in common with it.
So close, yet so far away. But we do have a rebuttal from Bubblegum Gun here. He says, is Yahweh a desert pagan god?
No.
Answer, yes. Hey, what he said, answer yes. This is an irrefutable argument. So Bubblegum,
intensely stupid. It is intensely stupid. So
Bubblegum is used to Islamic arguments. So in comparison, he thinks that this argument is on the same level as the arguments they make for Islam. So it holds up to scrutiny in his mind. Mm-hmm. Good point here from Houston. This will be a better stream than normal when it's already gained double the usual number of dislikes. Yes, I always appreciate it when Muslims come in and they let me know which streams bother them more than others by disliking them. So thank you very much for all the Muslims who have helped us out by letting us know this is a sensitive topic for you.
I think Bubblegun is being stupid on purpose, by the way.
Yeah, he could be. He could be. But we do have an example for sure of a Muslim here from Goswood Gasser. He says, you guys don't have a clue. The pagans in Mecca knew Allah, but they were associating partners with Allah with the idols. So
that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
The only Allah that existed was a pagan god. Allah was anciently pagan. The only Allah who ever existed was pagan. He was in pagan lists of gods. He was referred to in pagan terms. He was Allah because he had 3 daughters. So if you take a pagan god and you strip away his daughters and say, no, he's the creator and doesn't have any daughters, he's still the pagan god.
Just to be clear here, you said, before Goswell arrived, but you said it, that Allah was a pagan god with 3 daughters. And then Goswood comes in here and he tells us, you guys are clueless. Everyone knows that Allah was a pagan god. Okay, thank you. Thank you for accusing us of being clueless. Yes, we know that Muhammad sort of eventually pretended that he got rid of all the other gods. But notice he got rid of all the others. He didn't replace Allah with the true God. He just got rid of a bunch of the idols and kept one of them around.
Right, right. And he's like, as long as you don't actually have a physical idol of this God, it's the true God. So, at the time of Muhammad, there was a divine pantheon, a divine family. It was Hubal, who was also called Allah, and who was associated with the moon. I talked about how all of the South Arabian systems had moon associations, just like you are the high god if you have 3 daughters, right? You're Allah because you have 3 daughters. Well, if you're the high god, you are also associated with the moon, right? So he picks up, go to last time to hear a little bit more detail, but he picks up the moon from human, particular weather control from Baal, and he is Allah because he has 3 daughters. And then they go and they're already borrowing from the Christians and Jews by making him particularly the creator. So they are already borrowing heavily because they're trying to syncretize their pagan system into something that can compete with Christianity. Now, Asherah, who is the mother goddess, is a lot who you can find from the theophoric names is often referred to as Shams, which means sun. So a lot is associated with the sun because sun's often a wife of the moon. It's just considered appropriate. It's not that the physical burning ball of gas, which they would consider to be like a completely different type of substance, right? It's not that literally is a lot. It is that is appropriate to be associated with one of their high goddesses. Astarte or Aphrodite is essentially Al-Uzza, who's associated with Venus. So
I just want to be clear here, since we gave Bubblegum credit for trying to make a joke. I do want to make it clear that he is not joking. He says he's not a Muslim.
He actually is that stupid. Good.
I take his word for it that he's not a Muslim. However, he does actually think that Yahweh is a desert pagan god. And he says, look it up. Yeah, where should we look that up exactly? The Encyclopedia of Idisi? Do let us know.
Pretty much. So the kind of the odd daughter out is Fate or Manat. And I think that Fate got added because Fate was so incredibly important, originally referred to under the name God, was incredibly important to the pagan systems. And it originally each individual tribe had its own fate power, and she was kind of the third one added. She doesn't apparently get to have a planet associated with her. She's just kind of the and fate. But we have our moon, sun, Venus, and now fate kind of tacked on.
This will be the last time I bring up Bubblegum here because I'm sure they don't have any evidence, but I just wanted to make it crystal clear to everyone their argument. Just Google Yahweh verse Chemosh.
It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website.
I'm sure it's on a website, so it's got to be true, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody wrote something, and so it's totally true. It's totally not completely moronic. All right, so I do want Muslims to stop lying and saying that the crescent moon is Ottoman and that they borrowed it from the Byzantines. That is a lie. That is not true. It is not even a mistake. It is a lie. So if you are repeating this, you are repeating a deliberate lie. No one could have made this mistake on accident. So over here on the left, I have John of Brienne's seal from the 13th century, and he was ruler over one of the Crusader states of Jerusalem. And we see there in the middle, we see the Tower of David and Jerusalem, and then we see the Holy Sepulchre on the left with the Christian cross on top of it. And then on the right, we see the Dome of the Rock. What's it got on top of it, everybody? It's got a crescent moon. Have they conquered the Constantinople yet? The answer is no. Had the Ottomans appeared yet? No. And yet, weirdly, they have a crescent moon on top of one of their holiest sites. Why is that? Maybe because it's an ancient symbol that Islam frequently used. Now, their proof that this is a Byzantine symbol is a coin up there in the upper right that you see that says Byzantium, that shows a crescent moon and a star, right? Well, Byzantium, the pagan city, before it was taken over and renamed Constantinople, it survived a siege from Philip of Macedon, the dad of our famous Alexander the Great, right? Survived a siege in 340 BC. They attribute it to the goddess Hecate, who's another Venusian goddess, and they produced this coin in the 1st century with a crescent. 1st century, I believe, BC, but possibly AD. But they considered her one of their patron deities, et cetera, for a while they were pagan. And at one point, either in the 1st century BC or AD, they produced a singular coin that had this symbol on it, right? And since then, there have been no coins with this symbol on it. It was never used in the Christian Eastern Roman Empire as a symbol of the city. And it was never adopted by them in any way. So between 330 AD and 1453 AD, there was no star and moon symbol to be found in Constantinople. Also, Byzantium was never used as the name of the city in the Eastern Roman Empire. Whenever we say Byzantine and stuff like that, these are very Western terms that are applied because Western people who are from Western Europe don't like crediting a nation that is centered on Constantinople as truly being the Roman Empire. So we came up with our own terms. It's not what they call themselves at any point, right? So, no, this was not anything that they could have even found at that time. They're digging up super ancient things that, this is part of the pagan backdrop. This Venusian star together with the crescent moon, ancient pagan symbol that somehow ends up on the top of important sites for Muslims hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before before they supposedly introduce it. So it's been there, yet, and hundreds of years later, they will totally introduce it then.
Well, to be fair, maybe they just thought it was very pretty looking art and they decided to put it on the top of their most sacred religious sites because they thought it was very pretty looking. I think that's very plausible.
Yeah. So
I did want to make a quick comment here for Kofifi. His first comment was, why don't you prove your version of history? And I said, that's what we do on this channel. And then he says, every time I've seen the stream, it's you talking about Islam, which to be fair is idiotic, but that does not prove nothing. That does nothing to prove you're right. Well, if we are making a theory on the origins of Islam, and we're talking about the origins of Islam, and we're providing good evidence, that definitely does do something to prove us right about what we're talking about. But I guess you're trying to say this does nothing to prove Christianity, right? Which you're correct. That isn't the purpose of this stream. I do have streams on the truth of Christianity. I suggest you watch one of those if that's what you want to see. I have a Bible study every single week. I have apologetic streams. If you go to my homepage, you can see a whole playlist of all my apologetics videos. There's dozens of them. So if that's what you want to see, great. But the reason we're talking about the history of Islam is because we're interested in the history of Islam. Not that complicated. All right.
Okay, so while moons, stars, and even suns did make it into medieval heraldry, they had meanings that were specific, and they weren't pagan meanings. They weren't like associated with pagan sorts of things. The full moon meant peace. The stars meant military service of different types. You had a different type of star. It was in a particular area. It was supposed to mean a different type of military service. The sun meant glory or splendor generally. A crescent originally meant service in the Crusades. That is against Muslims, because the Muslim symbol was a crescent. So if you're fighting them, you put crescents on your heraldic symbols. Interesting. And oh, and over here in the left, just because it amused me, one of the early minted images or Islamic coins had a big fat star on it. I was just amused by that. Whenever we go to the Islamic sources, we find out immediately that nighttime was especially significant to Muhammad. So this nighttime cave vigil that Muhammad was doing, that all the pagans had done too. This was a pagan practice. All of the Islamic sources admit that yes, all the pagan men would go into this cave and would do a ritual retreat period and do pagan practices in there. And they're kind of embarrassed by it. So they're like, he's feeding the poor out in the cave in the boonies. Because I know that when I want to feed the poor, what I do is I go a couple of miles away from all the poor people are, and I hide out in a cave, and I do spiritual, mystical practices in order to feed poor people. That makes sense. That we go away.
Yeah, I work in the homeless system, and that's exactly what we do. We regularly just go out to caves in the wilderness and do rituals. That's how we seek to end homelessness.
Yes. So this has infernal, meaning, underworldly associations. It has nocturnal associations, very strong with the origins of Islam, right? So Muhammad's early practice also focused on nighttime rituals over and over and over again. The sources talk about people coming in the night to listen to Muhammad and his people praying, and coming in the cover of darkness and running into people in the darkness and all of this. So it's everything he does early on is at night, not during the day. And in Surah 73, we have a specific reference to his nighttime vigils and how important they were to Islam, early Islam. So, oh, you who are wrapped in garments, stand all night except a little. Then there's some funny additions because apparently he couldn't keep this up after Allah missed his early date in the world. Stand all night except a little, half of it, or a little less than that, or a little more. And recite the recitation in a slow style. But it's about standing up at night. And all of this repeated bowing stuff is not really part of the earliest part of Islam. It isn't happening. I don't even think that it is happening at the Kaaba at this point. Instead, it's happening in one of his first believers' houses. He gave it to Muhammad for the purpose of these night gatherings, and they would stand up for hours and hours and hours, repeating the prayers that Muhammad told them to repeat over and over and over again. Even to this day, the last third of the night remains a very special time for prayer. Allah's supposed to descend and grab the prayers at that time. And yeah, I assume the last third of the night is like from 3 a.m. to sunrise, essentially, or the way they figured 3 a.m. He's not terribly specific on how you should figure it, because you really couldn't then, because they didn't have any form of clock there. But it is supposed to be the last third of the night. We also hear very specifically about the importance of the observing prayers because of the being able to see Allah's face like the moon. And this is supposed to be on the 14th of the month, so that would mean day of full moon. We were in the presence of the prophet when he looked at the moon when it was full, and he said, "You will see your Lord as you see this moon. You will not have any difficulty in seeing him. So if you're able not to be overcome in observing a prayer before sunrise and a prayer before sunset, then do so." So make sure that you're getting in these two prayers that bracket the night, particularly important because of Allah's face being like a full moon. So you get all of these kind of these lunar associations. And you even find in the Bible that the oldest record of the Bible that says anything about what Arabs believe, they talk about the moon crescents and the earrings that the Arabs wore and on the necks of their camels. That this was an identity marker for Arab society, is this devotion to crescent moon imagery. And this kind of continues through. So I had mentioned before that the original context of the Meccan masjid is Minian. Their god was Wad, from South Arabia, right? Wad means love. He's a love god, so he's probably originally Al-Uzza's consort. He was symbolized by snakes, and he was necessarily the moon god because he was a high god. He probably also had the divining arrows because those got carried on to other Kaaba and into Hubal's association. We don't see as many northern divining arrows things, so it may be southern in origin. So we also have in a particular story of an Arab legend how the moon was seen kind of as a chief god, even in folklore. Some stars and planets were given human characters. According to the legend, Al-Dabarat, one of the stars in the Hyades group, fell deeply in love with Al-Thureya, the fairest of the Pleiades stars. With the approval of the moon, he asked for her hand in marriage, and she objected, saying coquettishly, "What would I do with a fellow like that with no money?" Because apparently stars need money. But the idea is that the moon is required for approval. And we have remnants of this astral worship in the Hajj of Muhammad's day and the Hajj of today. So they became fossilized in the Hajj even during the Jurham era, most likely. Paralleling the modern Hajj, if we put the modern Hajj side by side with what we know about what the pagans were doing, we can see a lot of parallels and differences both. Now, there is an interesting factoid here is that HLL, just in English, is the root for the crescent moon. And that's going to be important later, like Hillal, right? And Allah's root letters are HLLH, so it appears as an anagram. So words in anagram form are sometimes legitimately connected to each other. So it would feel providential that Allah and Hillal have a connection. This is actually coincidental, but it would feel like to an Arab speaker, sort of like to an English speaker, that S-U-N sun is like S-O-N sun. That feels like there's a connection there. Well, this would feel like there's a connection there for these Arabic speakers, except it actually would be from literally their own language. And so this would reinforce the use of Allah for your moon associated god and it being appropriate because of this seeming connection, even though it's coincidental.
So
and now I'm going to get like 50 Muslims saying it's not actually connected.
Yeah. So before you go on, I do have to give Random 2 a free logic lesson. He says this got to be worst straw man against Islam I ever heard leaving this stupid stream. So here's your lesson. When you use the term straw man, that means a specific thing. That means when you misrepresent your opponent's position, make a weak version of it, and then refute it. We are not attempting to refute any position of Islam. Therefore, it is literally impossible that this stream could be a straw man argument. So just wanted you to know how to properly use terms. So next time when you're upset about a stream, you can at least say something that sounds relevant.
Nice. So we are actually going to talk about lunacy and lunatic and moon connection because it is incredibly interesting. So at the time of Muhammad, when he was a small child and young adult, and before he conquered Mecca, there are factions of Meccan paganism. So the Deen of Mecca was accepted by a group that were called the Muhramun. There we go, Mahramun, which means, and it comes from the root for haram. And I'm doing a terrible job at making a difference between the different H's, but haram, there we go, a little bit better. And so that means literally the deen of the people who are observing the sacred, right? That they think that Mecca is a sacred place. So they're connected to that. So look at that H, dotted H. This is a pointy H, not the loopy H in Arabic, because if I just say it, it'll sound the same to everybody. And RM, right? These are the sacred observing people, right? And the first group, and within this larger group of the sacred observing people, the people who have the religion of Mecca, there are multiple divisions. Two main ones are the Hilla and the Hums, okay? And the Hilla was a newer term that they needed to make up after they created the second term. And these are the division, the fundamental division of tribes who were devoted to observing the Hajj route that included the Meccan Kaaba, right? And it still consisted of most of the tribes later on, because only a few of them sort of separated out and became part of this second group, Hums. So Hilla is H.LL, not HLL. So it is not the same root as the moon. I thought it might be at first, but then I actually looked at it and I was like, oh, well, no. It would be really cool if it was, though.
How irresponsible of you, actually looking something up and making sure an argument works instead of just repeating it. This is not how we preach Islam.
No, that's not how you do Islam. Anyway, the root actually means like to loosen and tie, but it also means to encamp. So you camp down a place. Hilla is connected to halal as well, because the idea is kind of permissibility with the loosening. It's the mental connection. So these roots are connected to these concepts, right? So these are the people who you might say encamp in areas around Mecca. That might be the reason why they got this name. The Hums, which is a plural of ahmas, it means like zealous. It means fiery fighters, something like that. And it was founded sometime between 658 and 675, according to the reports of Al-Azraqi. It was founded, specifically it said it was founded after the year of the elephant, okay? And I'm not sure if they mean actually after the year of the elephant or after when Muhammad was born, which was even later. I suspect that it was after Muhammad was born. And this is a newer division of the tribes which acknowledge specifically the supremacy of the Kaaba above other sites. And they unify their forms of Hajj in very particular ways. So this Hums is like this elite inner group who are special to the Kaaba and get special rights concerning the Kaaba and special responsibilities toward it. And this new development is part of this campaign to make Allah of the Kaaba more desirable to all of these pagan tribes than converting to Christianity. So it's this Allah first paganism being pushed to the next level. So the Kaaba is also called Al-Hamsa, and that should actually be a dotted H, but I didn't copy paste it. Now that's a really odd word because it is connected to Ahmas and the idea of zealotry and fiery fighters in defense of religion, right? But Hamsa also means 5, and it's specifically connected to the sign of the hand of Fatima, which is this evil eye figure. So I'm not sure why it was called Al-Hamsa, which meaning was the source behind it, and I couldn't find anyone spelling out specifically, oh, it's definitely not this, this evil eye good luck symbol against that. No one could really say why it means that. But since Allah is a high God, becomes more important. Mecca becomes Allah's home, and so it becomes more important as this high God is more important. So you guys should, if you're Hums, you should really think that Mecca is super important. And it's also important to note that Hamas, the Sunni Palestinian group, is impressed by this Hums alliance and actually is kind of imitating it. They're saying that we're the new zealous group. We're the new inner group that truly defends Islam in the same way that the Hums, even though pagans, were truly the early champions of the Kaaba. So there is a linguistic connection and a conceptual connection there. So there are two other groups that are a lot less important. The Tools were specifically southern. Tools were southern tribes, and they did recognize the Meccan Hajj peripherally, but don't seem to be central to going there every time. They might not have observed any of the specifically recorded Hajj traditions. They're so peripheral to the sources it's hard to tell. And a lot of these sources it's telephone game, so everything's distorted, right? And then there's another group called the Basel that supposedly observed 8 whole sacred months instead of 4, and just one small sub-tribe of the Luhay. They may have just adopted this practice as an excuse to be left alone for more parts of the year, because the rest of the people who were in the group of the sacred observers in that religion left them alone during those months, and it's really unknown how they do Hajj. So we're really going to be talking about the Hilla mainly, and side notes on the Hums, explicit, things that are particular to them.
So I'll jump in here with a comment from Holy Quran Debunks Holy Bible. I'm going to have to give another logic lesson here. So according to your name, the Bible is debunked, yet your comment is Hajj is mentioned in Bible. See Psalms 84, 5 through 6. So here's some logic for you. When you say something is debunked, it means that's false information. You can't then appeal to that text to prove your point. You gotta either say the Bible's correct, then you can appeal to it, or you gotta say it's wrong, and then you can't appeal to it. But let me just take 1 second here, read the verse to see how ridiculous this is.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Find out where this is happening.
Oh, well, I can start at the beginning, but it's right there in verse 5. But I'll start at 1, per Mary's request. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Yahweh. My soul longs, yes, faints, for the courts of Yahweh. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, Yahweh of hosts, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever singing your praise. And then we come to the verse you want us to quote. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, they make it to a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. Continuing on for just one more verse, they go from strength to strength. Each one appears before God in Zion. So, where is Zion, Mary?
What is Zion? Zion is another name for Jerusalem.
So the theory here from Holy Quran, debunks Holy Bible, yeah, right, is that people who live in Israel are traveling from Israel all the way down to Mecca for some reason, going through it, coming all the way back up to Jerusalem in order to go to the holy city. Very interesting theory.
And apparently Allah is also an idiot and can't spell, because he used the wrong letters for Baca, which is the valley that's in there. And it also means, literally it means the valley of tears, the valley of crying. So is your Baca, a valley of tears and crying and sorrow that become joyful because people happen to be traveling through this awful place. They're going through an awful place of crying to Zion, and so transform this awful place into a place of rejoicing and pools and wonderfulness, because they're going to a good place through this bad place.
I think he actually helped his argument there by saying that this is a horrific place that no one would ever want to go to. That does sound a lot like Mecca, to be honest. But after he said this, and several people asked him, what does the verse say, and such, he said, you've been debunked. Okay. Calm down. Calm down, my friend.
Yeah, what I keep trying to say to these children is that
you're missing a little bit up here, my friend. Like, you're not even paying attention.
Sorry about the slight delay there, but
yeah, is not a debunking. So a debunking.
Well, he didn't actually even respond.
You have actually given a coherent and forceful reply that deals with the objections and puts them to rest. Now, what you have done is you've made noises. You've typed on the keyboard. That is not a debunking. Just because you respond No, you. You're like, that's not a debunking, honey. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. So let's go. Yeah.
I do want to read one other comment, and I'm not 100% sure the way Gordon intended this, but it made me laugh because Gordon said he's a high god, all right, and I took it as high on drugs.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what he meant or not, but I think that might be an accurate description of Allah for sure.
So there are other groups who do not observe Mecca or the Meccan Hajj route. It's an entire route. They don't observe this route. They don't consider it to be a sacred time. They don't consider Mecca to be sacred places, even though they're pagans too. And they're called people of other deens and other pedigrees. So they're not from the race and tribe of those who observe Mecca, and not from their religion, because to them these are racist Arabs and everything's tribal to them. Literally everything's tribal. And so who you worship ought to be tribal. That's why they're trying to make this national Arab god, Allah, more attractive. And so there are those who don't have this deen and pedigree. So the other ones, folks who have other deens and pedigrees, are called Mahilun. Mahilun. And this is a little bit confusing because their root is that HLL. And this is a lump category of the pagans who reject Mecca entirely. Now, the reason why they, even though like Hilla, they have this HLL root, that's because it's halal to kill them if they harass you in any way, because their deen and pedigree are different. So if you think that they might be harassing you, slaughter them all. This sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Like if you're opposed in any way in your deen, that you should kill the unbelievers. Yeah. So this is very much the Muhammad had a pattern for his declarations in the paganism that came right before him, because he's still a pagan and he's following pagan things. So this was a ruling of the head of Malik ibn Kanana, and they're the clan of the intercalitors, and those were the folks who adjusted the calendar, right? They adjusted it. They could adjust it if there was an active war going on and delay the Hajj, because you can't just like make everybody put down their weapons, but also they adjusted it to keep it lined up to the calendar appropriately, so it didn't just rotate around the year. And because this was in the authority of this Kanana group, and by the way, the Kanana are closely related to the Quraysh. So the Quraysh and the Kanana are like the Quraysh are a division of the Kanana officially. Even though they're a synthetic tribe, their official alliance is with this Kanana group, right? And so this tribal leader over here has this authority over the Hajj. Well, that can't be tolerated if Muhammad is going to be the sole leader. So he says, no more intercalation. We have to have the feasts float around the year and make absolutely no sense, rather than allow this to be in the hands of someone else who's traditionally had it. But anyway, he gave the ruling that you should kill the unbelievers if you consider yourself at all harassed or threatened by them, because they are unbelievers and they're from a different deen. And so this is the viewpoint of these folks at this time. This was specifically enforced by a subgroup of the Hilla, led by Banu Tamim, and they were the enforcers of the sacred months, and thus also had positions of officials of the markets of the sacred months. So all the times to have, the only time you would want to have a market is when it wasn't legal for everyone to like fall on you and slaughter all your people and enslave all of you as you're leaving the market. That would kind of be bad. And if everybody knew where you were going to be at a particular time of year, then it'd be really easy to prey on you, right? And so by having these 4 sacred months, they could have these sacred market times where you're not allowed to kill people. And so this enforcement against, they were allowed to carry weapons to kill the unbelievers because the unbelievers might harass the people who otherwise follow these sacred months at these various markets. They also had authority over certain religious events during the Hajj. They were called the Rami, the Nafar, and the Ijaza. And I have not been able to figure out what Rami or Nafar means, but Ijaza meant that they had authority to give commands, religious commands at certain places and certain times. Ijaza now means that you have the authority to be the person to give an isnad. You could be a person in the isnad. You have the authority to transmit something. So it's transmission authority is what this became. But in pagan times, it was authority to give people commands in a religious context. They also had the position of hakam, which meant judge of the different markets. So all of this is like really stuff that you never hear because it's so buried in the Islamic like fantasy land, essentially.
So I had a question here. Have you heard people make this claim? It was all originally a Hanif thing, and the pagans copied. Well, I'm sure that you'll find Muslims saying that whatever we point out, that's obviously copied from something. The other group copied from the Muslims, but here's the thing, right? We're talking about things that definitely existed before the time of Islam, so that would be quite an extraordinary claim indeed if they were copying from something that didn't exist yet. It sounded like you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, so the Hanifs were themselves a form of paganized pseudo-monotheism. So the Hanifs were people who wanted to keep their racial, ethnic uniqueness and supremacy, that their God was the best God, but our God is really the monotheist God. So the word Hanapa, it meant a pagan. That's originally what it meant. It meant a pagan who didn't necessarily bow down to tons of idols. You aren't a polytheist, but you're still a pagan. And it is a word from the Syriac to denote a specific type of pagan who had specific pagan beliefs. And these guys ran away with this, going, "Oh, this form of paganism is legitimate." It's part of this syncretic pagan environment where they're trying to find legitimacy for their own paganisms. So there's also in the sources specifically a rival Kaaba, and there are references to other people wanting to set up their own quote unquote Kaabas, but there is one that's specifically called a Kaaba, and that's at Talbia, which was the home to Dhul Khalasa, and that's the idol of a particular tribe, set of tribes, and of the Arabs who resided in that area. This particular pagan site was not part of the Meccan Hajj loop. So there were a number of sites, of which Mecca was only one little piece, that was the original Meccan pagan Hajj loop. And the Islamic sources admit that it was called the Southern Kaaba. The word actually means possessor of purity. It's not a name. So my theory is that it is another rival Kaaba of Hubal Allah, and in the form that it was that he developed there. There's even a reference of the divining arrows being used there. The divining arrows, which were unique to Hubal at that time, may have originated with Wad, but became this kind of, as more of the northern tribes came in and dominated. The jiggling women there are also reminiscent of the naked women circling the Kaaba. And I mentioned before that at first I thought that naked jiggling women was just like one of those, haha, see how pagan they are? But that is affirmed by so many sources that I think there really were naked jiggling women at both the Kaaba and this place, because so many sources talk about this being a distinct practice. They seem to be confused.
Haram! Don't do that, it's a sin!
Right. So, you're kind of inclined to read it as being one of these exaggerations, but I mean, I certainly was, but given the number of different sources about it and the different kinds of details that survive about it, there probably was some sort of, and since he was, the god of rain, then he'd be the god of fertility. So there would be, and because he very much had a particular power over the development of children in wombs, this could be understood in that context. So the other supposed idols are likely fabrications or abandoned ruins, later accredited to Islamic destruction. For example, there were no pagan idols in Yemen at this time. They did not exist. Yet Ibn Ishaq claimed that there were. Ruda, that worship had completely petered out hundreds of years before, was supposedly destroyed in one trip in one particular place. Wad is assigned to a totally wrong region of the world where he never was worshipped, and at that time was completely Christian. They're like, oh, Wad is over here. Oh, so-and-so's over here. And they weren't there. So I think that the ones that were closest to Mecca were probably true because some of them were inherent and important parts of this pagan Hajj route. It probably seemed really uncomfortable to the writers, the discovery that most of the places that were destroyed were places that were specifically tied to Mecca, so they wanted to have like more places destroyed, and so made up some that absolutely had to be untrue. So now we're going to talk about the modern Hajj and how it parallels to this ancient Hajj and kind of go back and forth between the two. Got anything to say before then?
Nope. I think for once you pause and then I don't actually. Oh, yeah. I don't have anything specific to say, but I did have this one comment from Mark Fish. The Arabs
Yes.
were vying for ecumenical religious Disneyland. And I just thought that was such a perfect description of what was going on here.
They really were, except it wasn't so much ecumenical as it was syncretic, and they wanted it to be the God of the Arabs. They are looking for a national Arab God. That's why Islam is an Arab supremacist religion, and it's specifically a Qurayshi supremacist religion. So, and about how much better they are and how much Allah loves them best and how they're the best of creatures and best. So,
So yeah, I'm not what I'm not says, how do I convert to pre-Islamic Mecca? Asking for a friend that wants jiggly women.
yeah. They very much like their references to jiggly women. And they're jiggly because you can see them because they're naked, by the way. All right, so Dhul al-Hajj, the month of Hajj, right? It begins the day after first seeing the crescent moon. So that's one half day off from from a traditional Hebrew calendar that would start at nightfall. And anytime between day 1 and 7, you have to get ready for the tawaf of arrival, which is like where you arrive and circle. Tawaf is circling, so it's the circling of arrival, right? Now, the difference between Umrah and the Hajj is that basically the Umrah is a subsection of the Hajj. It's identical with the Tawaf of arrival, except for the very last step of this circling of arrival. It's just done outside the Hajj, or when Umrah is combined with the Hajj, the Umrah counts as the first bit. So the Umrah is basically the parts of the Hajj which only happen in Mecca without leaving its boundaries. It was invented and observed by the Hums faction as a second mini Hajj done during the other sacred months. So basically, if you want to become one of these Hums elites, you need to do the regular Hajj circuit in a particular way. And you also need to come another time and do a Hajj that just is the Meccan part of it that doesn't go outside, to show how important you consider Allah to be over the other gods, right? So that's why it was invented as the second thing. So it was introduced at the times that Hums was, right? It showed how they put the pagan Mecca Kaaba above the rest of the pagan sites of the Hajj route. So today it's not allowed to be done by locals in association with the Hajj, because that'd be like double dipping, and only visitors are allowed to double dip. If you are already there, you can do it twice without having to take a special trip. But visitors get this special double dip by substituting the part of the Hajj that's the same as the Umrah with an Umrah and get extra credit, even though in most forms it's like easier. So Hajj and Umrah both begin by putting on Ihram. And again, notice the HRM, that should be dotted, but it's I always have to copy paste because it doesn't show up on my keyboard. So I don't always do it. But again, that has to do with sacredness. You're putting on the clothes of a sacred state, right? So how is it different now than the 7th century? So first you have to purify yourself and get change into your ihram clothes before passing the boundary of Mecca. And Muhammad did this originally from Medina, and he forced when Hums was introduced, this clothing was required for all the people who would come. And the people who were Hums would own the clothing, and they required everyone else to rent it from them or buy it from them if they couldn't afford to, if they didn't already have some of their own. So it was a nice source of extra money to go and force everybody to wear this special white clothing.
So you consume the clothing, and then you plant the seeds in the ground, and you get thousands of garments in return.
Something like that. And then there were special relationships between different sub-clans of Mecca and different groups that certain, to kind of have these special bonds, certain groups were provided clothing by certain clans through these agreements that helped reinforce the supremacy of Mecca, and also show generosity toward the clans, but then they were also kind of paid for it. So it was this whole system through which, so if you go to a lot of these pagan tribal systems, there will be a system in which there is a tribal chief whose job it is to distribute largesse to his people. And his standing is partly based upon all of the benefits that he can give to his followers. So and so you have these systems of reciprocal semi-gifting. They're obligated, but they're not considered like taxation or tribute exactly. But all the people give something to the people in Mecca, and then Mecca gives a certain percentage of that back to the head person to honor him, and then that person distributes it to his own people to get more honor. So it's like this cycling of money for pride and honor and reputation. And you'll find these convoluted systems in, the Vikings had it. These pagan bandits are going to have it too. Although it is interesting that the Hums were specifically supposed to be above banditry, which we'll talk a bit about in a different stream. But this is the kind of system that's working here. This mutual, you pay this person, that person pays this other person, and you all get honor, and you're all giving each other stuff, but you're all obligated to give stuff. So it's a little bit complicated there. So today you now do two segments of prayer. There was no equivalent of that. The pagans did prostrate just like Muslims, but they didn't do group prayers in sync. That was apparently something that Muhammad specifically introduced, is this group prayers in sync with one person calling out and things. Today you announce your intention for which type of Hajj Umrah you're doing, which you wouldn't have had to do then because there was only one type. At that point, you're officially in Ihram. Today you do that right before you pass the boundary. And again, this is probably an invention of Muhammad because he's the one who invented this double dipping system. So you have to say which one you're in. So then you recite the Talbia, and it's the invocation of seeking. And in Islam, you're supposed to say it as much as possible, and you keep doing it until you kiss the stone in Umrah, or you throw a pebble at the pillar in Hajj. Every tribe in the pre-Islamic times had its own Talbia before Islam, and Muhammad modified the Talbia of a particular tribe to be the now modern Muslim Talbia. Now, the important point here is that the pagan, the Muhrimun, the deen, their religion, the religion of the pagans of Mecca, right? The ones who observed Mecca Hajj, they did this at the sighting of the moon. So, the state of sanctification is entered before the invocation called Talbia, and the root of this is the LB there. The T makes it noun form. When people saw the crescent moon, the Hillal, before Hajj, they would shout their pagan incantational slogans. They would also shout them just before circling the Kaaba or before each circle. All of the people who had the deen of the Moon did this. So they had the deen, the religion of the Meccan Hajj, had this that the Muslims still have today. And here is a quote from an article, scholarly article. The pilgrim enters the state of Ihram after he expresses his intention to make the pilgrimage by repeating the formula Labbaika. The Talbia is pronounced with the tahlil, or joy felt seeing the new moon, which opens the ceremonies. With it, the pilgrim raises his voices in the acclamation of the name of the deity. A fundamental element of the ceremony is the ihlal, which is crescent moon seeking, the psalmody with jubilation at the invocation of the formula. The talbiya has become a synonym of ihram and ihlal. And again, I am doing terrible at distinguishing the two H's. So these are the moon H's, not the one with halal. It's ihlal, and not the one of ihram, which should be the dotted one. So
yeah, well, I mean, don't worry about it too much.
I don't think anybody can hear it anyway.
Right.
If you don't speak
You're right.
Arabic.
If you don't have a sound in your language, you generally aren't able to perceive the sound anyway. So even if you were doing it perfectly, speakers of English or other languages that don't have that sound would not be able to hear it anyway. So
yeah, I have a friend who took Arabic, and he said that he felt like half of the first course was just his teacher making different H sounds, not ha, but ha, not and not ha, like all of these that were nearly identical, which they could not hear the difference of whatsoever. And the and wait, the and are really hard to hear the difference of and really hard to make. So anyway, the original Nizar and Quraysh Talbiya is, and we'll explain exactly what these are. These and similar invocations are the origin of al-Humma. So that's a very archaic vocative construction that only survives in this word in classical Arabic. So normally if you're calling someone, you're saying, oh, so-and-so, you have a ya plus that. So you'd have ya Allah. But there is the mimation, which is still there, that M at the end, adding this ending, was a way of calling someone in a really, really old, an old way of doing it that had completely died out in Arabic, but was still in use in this particular construction as an old-fashioned way of calling to this pagan deity. So no one actually knows, speaking of being archaic, what Labbaika really means. It's most commonly parsed as the verbal noun lab, which means to remain in place, together with I, which is an oblique form of the dual in construct, and the ka, the second person singular masculine suffix. So it would mean something like staying continuously in for of you. Okay, it's almost always translated as here I am, but that's not what it means in the slightest, because it's got a you in it. It's talking about you, so it's addressing someone, right? However, lib is considered the Proto-Semitic origin of lab, and it means heart, which is a seat of intellect and emotions, not just love. It's a Hebrew lev, Arabic lub are the equivalents of it, while qalb is the more common for heart in Arabic now, and even in classical Arabic. The other one still did have that meaning at the time and still does in certain contexts now. By extension, lib or lab means the center of something. Like if you're in the heart of the city, you would use this word. That's how philologists arrive at the idea of staying, like staying at the heart of something, remaining in the center of it, in the midst or whatever, right? And also through other places where it's used sort of like that. So Lane's lexicon understands it as basically doubly waiting at thy service, that's why it has the dual to indicate like the extra intent there. So you're doubly waiting. You're doing more than just merely waiting for you, the God who's being addressed, right? Or even doubly love is given thee is even one another kind of gloss that's given in this absolutely enormous multi-page exposition of the different things this word can mean, right? So notice the word malaka, which is he possesses. And so this goes right to the Melech debate in the Surah Al-Fatiha, whether or not it is owner or king, and how you should read it. Well, we have these pagan usages where we have owner being used and possessor and possessing. This is the verb form, right? So in English, how you might translate it is doubly staying in service to you, O Allah, doubly staying in service to you. You have no partner except the partner or partners who you have. You possess him and what he possesses. So I had talked before about how I'm calling it primatheism, where there is one high God who fully possesses and owns and knows and controls all other deities, right? And so, and this elevation, there are still other gods. They are gods. They should be worshipped as gods. They're not just ontologically different than humans. They are deserving of worship. But they are the partners of the high God because the high God has fashioned them such to be their lower pantheon, lower order gods. And so this is a development of the Quraysh Allah first polytheism, essentially. And you can find it in this Talbia that was said at the side of the moon. You're looking at the moon and you're talking to God as you're looking at this crescent moon and speaking to him. And then you continuously say it later. So, and I'm going to compare the two, Muhammad's Talbia versus this pagan one. So the first phrase is the same, doubly staying in service to you, O Allah, doubly staying in service to you. And then again, same meaning again, you have no partner. Then the Quraysh and those closely associated with them start saying, accept the partners who you have. And instead, Muhammad said, indeed, the praise and the grace you have, just replacing one phrase with a more acceptable phrase, right? And the Quraysh then say, you possess him and what he possesses. And since Muhammad's denying association, he says, and you have in the possession, and you have the possession. You have no partner. So you have the possession of all things, essentially. And so this is a very similar, if you notice the rhymes of the last words of each phrase, he's trying to make them sound very much the same. And so this is an instance of something that is inherently pagan, created by pagans to express their pagan faith, that Muhammad is taking and trying to monotheize further. So the pagans had already taken their faith and made it like this Allah first primatheism, and he's trying to remove the layer of paganism and make it legit, as if you can just like remove pagan elements until you arrive at monotheism. True monotheism is what you get whenever you continuously remove certain other elements. No, that's not how it works, but that's how it works for him.
Well, it is interesting because that's how Muslims tend to define the religion today. They're never, we are X. That's always, we're not Y. Like, we're not worshippers of a Trinity. We're not polytheists. We're not Hindus. Whatever, right? Whatever they want to say, depending on basically whatever the person they're talking to is. We're not that. Well, what are you? Oh, I can't tell you. I cannot define my religion. All I can tell you is what I am not. And I am definitely not whatever I strawman you to be.
So there are a whole bunch of other talbiyat, meaning other talbiyas, that were in, well, I should have said pre-Islamic usage, not current Islamic usage. Sorry, guys. pre-Islamic usage. Makes much more sense, right? Muhammad, of course, took the one from his own people because that's the one he's most associated with. And remember, this is a Quraysh supremacy, pseudo-monotheistic religion that takes out the elements that are clearly polytheistic to make it more acceptably monotheistic, and just a farther step than they had already done with this. And so here are other ones. So in another form, another group of the Hums, this inner group, they invoke Allah. They address him as the Lord of Sirius. They ask for his aid against offenders. They address him as the Lord of Manat, Allah, and Al-Uzza, the Lord of the sanctuary of the Kaaba. They come to him riding on lean camels, having evidently made arduous journeys, and they have left their idols forsaken and desolate, as they say in their invocation. It may be true. It may be that Sirius might be the original identity of Elaf, who is one of the only gods that we have a clear record of there being a physical idol of inside the courtyard around the Kaaba. The Kaaba itself only had Hubal and some horns and a whole bunch of icons bought from any church raffle that they could get them from. But in the surrounding area, we have Shams, female, Elaf, male, Sirius is male, and then Naila, I think, who is also female. So perhaps that is that maybe he's a god who's closely associated with it for that reason. And I don't know what I was going to continue to say. I was editing these while I was on vacation.
Come get your gods. Come get your gods. We got big gods. We got small gods. We got friendly gods. We got angry gods. We got all the gods you could possibly want because we borrowed them from everywhere. This is I think this is a legitimate question. It's going way back, but also it was only said recently, so he's going way back.
Yes.
Wasn't there some kind of prophecy for later times that Muhammad made which mentioned the jiggly women?
Yes, they mentioned the jiggly women in that specific Kaaba, and the end would not come until they jiggle around it. So when he destroyed it, he destroyed his own prophecy. So I don't know why he did that. So there are others that say that may be entirely fabricated because they have this genre of just trying to assemble all the Talibat that you possibly could and assign them to various people. And some of them, like one tribe will have 6 different Talibat associated with them. And then some other tribe that is Christian will have one associated with them. So they should be regarded with suspicion, especially as to the assignment and also somewhat as to the contents, but especially the assignment. For example, the Ghassan were Christian at this time, and there's no evidence that any of the Ghassan regarded the Mecca as any kind of Hajj or cared about in the least, if they even knew about it. So anyway.
But H.J. Evans has the answer here. You just say, all the previous prophets agree with me.
Not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up.
And then you're done. You have proven your religion correct.
Yeah. But they claim that the Ghassan are invoking Allah on behalf of their kings, addressing him as the Lord of their people. Again, that one's very suspicious. Rabia supposedly talk about Rab, the Rabiat al-Khasham, that's their particular tribe, doubly saying in service to you, truly ritualistic and tender Hajj, basically. Muhammad was said to have borrowed that one too, the second one, and to have used it. It just didn't stick. A third relation has some additional phrasing describing the race of the pilgrims toward Mecca, like to go like running toward it so that they may shave their heads. A fourth version shows some divergence. Now that's also interesting because now you don't shave your head at Mecca, you do it at Mina. So there's some question as to whether or not these different Hilla tribes seem to have all had slightly different traditions at this time. Fourth version shows some divergence, stressing their obedience to the Lord, who is not worshipped in a church or a synagogue. Their idols, they have said, they have left protected and safe. A fifth report adds to the concise form of the devotion and servitude a phrase stating that the Rabia did not come to Mecca to ask for gifts nor for reasons of trade. Others are said to call him the god of the beetles or the lord of the beetles. That means and I do the original source I took that one just said idols, but they actually had the Arabic there, so I was able to check it, and it was the stones, the meaning of stones, not of carved things, right?
So I need to butt in and explain why I'm laughing here, because Una, with a great reference to last week's streams, are the Jiggly Women Power Wash Daily by the Kaaba janitors, which, of course, as we all know, are the luckiest people on earth in their pagan Disneyland.
Indeed, indeed.
Nothing to do with anything, but I had to explain why I was laughing, because that one was too good.
So another one says that thou possessest him, that means a partner, whether thou destroyest or leavest him, thou art the forbearing, which is therefore leave him. So it's saying that Allah, this pagan god, was the creator of the lesser gods, and so he could destroy the lesser gods, but since you're forbearing, please leave these lesser gods because we use them for intercession. So there's some more. The Qais Elan, who are a very large northern tribe division, they describe themselves as being together with their idols in humble submission to Al-Rahman. Again, that may have been fabricated. Northern tribe using a southern term for Christian Jewish gods seems a little bit sus. The Thaqif, they're the folks who were who owned Taif. So Taif is owned by them. They ask for forgiveness of their sins. They say that their goddesses, Alat and Al-Uzza, were in the hands of Allah, and that the idols yielded obediently to him. This did not have the Arabic, so I couldn't check idols there, by the way, on either one of these. Asad named Allah the One, the Subduer, and asserted that they did not worship the idols. They also mentioned him in their Talbia as Al-Rabu Al-Samad. Remember that? Samad from before? So our solid Lord, perhaps from Baal's stick, his Samad stick. Jurham was extinct. The Talbia ascribed to them by this point. They were still around in the 6th century because they are on a map of Stephen of Byzantium, but didn't survive into the Islamic age. The Talbia ascribed to them that other people are like newly acquired property, while they are like the hereditary property of Allah, and they call themselves the first to come to Allah's meeting place. Notice, who's the first? That would be Jurham. They are the first to ever worship here. So yeah, I've got a lot of works to do for a number of books that I'm doing too many together. So.
But you can download her virtual books, i.e.
Yes,
her presentations.
Like the portions that I'm working on, you'll be able to download. So.
Yeah. What I was trying to say is we'll put the link to the presentation in the video description so you can reference that. Obviously, it's not in narrative form. It's not as fun to read as a book, but the facts are there.
So we talked about the Tahlil and Ihlal before. Ihlal is still called, if you say the Talbia aloud, and the source of that means crescent seeking, and Tahlil, which was glossed by the writer of that article, is said with the joy of the moon, is now specifically, there is no God but Allah, he has no partner with him, is the modern Islamic Tahlil. And yes, twerking Daus woman, yes, we're meant there. So let's look at all the meanings of this root, the HLL or Hillel. So its most basic meaning is to be bright or to shine. From that, it gave its name to the moon, specifically to the crescent moon, right? With a geminated L, so with a longer L, there are words relating to praise and acclamation. This gemination is an active voice over middle voice. So what that means is there is a difference if you go back to really, really, really early pre-Proto-Semitic or Semitic or Proto-Semitic sources. There was a clear difference in tense between the idea of the pot boiled and the fire boiled the pot. Now, it's a little bit hard to, it's hard for me to come up with examples, but we think about it as if we are doing an action that is acting upon something rather than just something happening, essentially. Middle voice is more something happening. The more active voice is more about doing that thing. And so in the very old sense, there's more of the taking an action toward a goal, right? This came to mean a lot of times replication or multiplication with the gemination instead of just being a more active thing. So it can indicate the difference between cutting something and shredding something, for instance, might be shown by gemination. It's not productive, which means that you can't, and actually, so Talbia is not actually connected to Taliban. I thought it was, Adnan, but then I went and looked. It's a different T for Mutalib and for Abu Talib and for Taliban. Those are connected, but Talbia is not actually connected to that. It's the ta there is one to make a noun. It's a different particle that has a different purpose. I also thought it was connected, but it's a different T and a different purpose, a different letter. So I know it's a little bit complicated. So back to my other complicated grammar thing, right?
You act like you only have two.
Yeah, sorry. There's this old.
I should retire this stream. Yeah. Mary gives a grammar lesson.
Yes, and complicated, really obscure points in Semitic languages, right? So there's this old change of gemination in this halal root that indicates praise because it's many people doing it, or many people doing it repetitively, or a more active voice is all kind of baked into this. And you can see it, for example, in hallelujah. Those two L's there are actually meaningful. And halala would be the word in Arabic. Halala. It's really hard for me to say the gemination because this is not a difference that exists in English either, right? But in this case, the tahlil comes from a saying that's tied specifically to seeing the hilal. So tying it to halala or praise does not seem nearly as appropriate. I also think that you might expect tahlil as the form if you were going to preserve that kind of geminated sense of it and tie it more directly to praise, that you wouldn't necessarily, your most expected form would not be tahlil if it were tied to praise rather than to the crescent moon. So I'm saying that yes, I'm aware they have other roots and other meaning, or this root can have other meanings in certain contexts. Since this is something that is said upon seeing the crescent moon and with other words that are connected to the crescent moon, it seems that tying it to the crescent moon specifically is far more appropriate than making the leap to the other meanings of the word. Now, for all of those who are making lunacy jokes, HLL also does have a sinister meaning, and it is connected to lunacy in Latin, for example. So the HLL in certain forms does mean madness through a primitive moon madness conceptual link. So just like in English, we talk about lunacy, you talk about it in Hebrew, the same sense exists as well. So whenever it says in Jeremiah 25, 15 and 16, and in many other places, for example, here's just one example. This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink from it. And they will drink and stagger and go out of their minds. That's that HLL root link, because of the sword that I will send among them. So this going out of your minds being a possibility with the moon does have very, very ancient roots that affect language, even in this monotheistic context, because obviously this is fully monotheistic, right? But in the Hijaz, it's not monotheistic. It's polytheistic. And so all the polytheistic associations of the moon and the power of the moon and the madness of the moon would still be very applicable. And this is very interesting in conjunction with the Arab belief in jinn possession and Muhammad's nighttime cave visitations. How everybody was very clear that there is that Muhammad was visited by jinn or demons or something. Everybody was quite positive of that, except for the few people who followed him at first. And then he started killing people, and they decided they changed their minds. He also nearly starved all of Mecca to death, and that's really why he won in the end. It's because he managed to cut off their food and nearly killed them all. So there are sub-steps to this circumambulation of the Kaaba. And first you start out by saying an invocation, and that would be one of the Talbiat or Tahlils in pre-Islamic times. That's what would have been then. Now you say your official invocation that you're supposed to say now. You're supposed to enter through a special gate, and this was in place specifically to cause you to approach by way of the Black Stone. There was no wall around the Kaaba, but there was still a special gate so that you'd walk through toward the Black Stone corner, which was the beetle of Allah, just like there is also an idol of Allah inside. So you would lower your gaze till you're near the Kaaba now, raise it, then raise your hands and do an invocation again. Then you recite lots of special incantations as you approach before you're close enough to do the circulation. And it's unknown exactly what each group did, but they had special things that they were supposed to say. Go around counterclockwise, starting from the Black Stone. You walk around the whole area, including the Hatem or Hijr Ismail, which I believe, again, was an attempt to mimic Byzantine churches. But they didn't know how to enclose it because they weren't smart enough. So I'm not sure what you mean by is there an E somewhere in that? Oh, hell. Ha! Oh my goodness, I'm slow. I'm slow. Here I am, like looking at actual. Thank you, Clayt, for your joke.
And as long as we're on jokes, there's a couple people who called the Taliban the Teletubbies.
Yeah, nice.
Which is great. I like that.
So yeah, the Lubeika, La Beca that you're supposed to say whenever that's part of the, it's actually part of the Talibah now, is how it gets its name. It doesn't get it from the root that means literally seeking, or which is what Taliban comes from. That's how they're different. But anyway, so you're supposed to do it 3 times going fast, 4 times slow. Ideally, you kiss the stone with each time around, the first time all the way to the last to make 8 times total. You touch the Yemeni cornerstone, which is another one of your pagan beetles of Allah. And then you use the opportunity to actually pray, do dua, but also to recite more invocations and the Quran That fast-slow difference was pre-Islamic. Nobody has any idea what it means. You just do it this way because Muhammad did it this way. Muhammad did it this way because pagans did it this way. Nobody remembers why. The 7 times were reportedly for the 7 heavenly bodies. So they were for the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets from Earth. And that's what all of the Islamic sources say. They flatly say that it's for these 7 heavenly bodies. That's why we do it 7 times. And that's pagan, and they still do it. So you're supposed to do 2 repetitions of your bowing salah prayer facing the black stone and behind the maqam of Abraham. And the maqam of Abraham is yet another pagan stone. So now you're including it in your prayer by doing it behind it, facing through both of them. So nice. The pagans prostrated, but they did different prayers. We don't know what they actually said. They didn't do them together in unison. We do know that. Their place and timing is not recorded, but it probably was still to that black stone. You also drink Zemzem water, and that is now the perfumed and desalinated seawater that gets pumped underground and right back out again. This Zemzem water seemed to have been restricted. Only the Hums were apparently allowed to drink it from some of the sources. Like, we are the Hums, the only ones who are able to do this. And it's also interesting that it was specifically, so the main purpose of the Zemzem water was for ritual cleansing. It was not for drinking. They did not get the regular drinking water there because it was known to taste particularly horrible. And in fact, a later guy called it the mother of black beetles because he said he thought it tasted like dead crushed bugs. One of the governors of Mecca said this. And apparently at this time, they would take this water and would soak dried, can't remember which fruit, but dried fruit in it. And then they would partake of this as like magical, medicinal type of water. This was not a source of water just drink. And this is something that I just assumed that it was drinking water, right? Because it's a well, it's drinking water. But no, apparently it tasted so foul that they would soak fruit in it at this time to like hide the taste, and then later they would like secretly throw a whole bunch of other water in it, so that it wouldn't be so foul tasting. But it was considered magical and medicinal and beneficial and special from Allah, not for drinking. Now you're supposed to, if you get a chance, clean to the wall between the black stone and the door. I think it's kind of unlikely that was used historically. Possible. But
well, I just have one thing to say about all of this stuff, all these descriptions of what an amazing city that Mecca was.
This is the best advertisement for Islam that's ever existed in the world.
I mean, don't you all like desperately want to convert to Islam now so that you can taste the disgusting water and enjoy what Islam has to offer? I mean, I sure do. I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to. Elizabeth says their most sacred site being the focus of the most sacred Islamic pilgrimage. How surprising, then, that this is actually, in fact, a pagan temple built originally for the worship of pagan Allah. Indeed. I'm sure we are all shocked to learn that the holy site of Islam was a site of pagan worship. As I had a couple Muslims tell me before this stream, I don't see a problem here. Everyone knows that the Kaaba was pagan before Islam came.
The issue.
This is a defense. A defense. Yes, our site was pagan.
And here is one of the really big important things to that. So what they'll say is, yeah, it was pagan. It was originally monotheistic, and then it became pagan. There is zero evidence. It did not exist before it existed as a pagan site. There's zero evidence of anything existing before then. The only sources that we have credit the Jurham with building it. They're the ones who built it. And the Jurham are pretty recent in terms of their existence as a tribe. They did not exist in, 500 BC. They did not exist, right? They did not exist at this time. And the Quran, or not the Quran, but Muhammad's, the Ahadith, placed them with Ishmael, because everyone knew that the Jurham were the first ones who had ownership of it. Well, in reality, yes, they were the first ones. Then they were relatively recent, and they built this pagan site as a pagan site from the very beginning. Nothing goes back to Ishmael. And in fact, I cannot find a single ancient person who thought that Ishmael built it before Muhammad. Now, I haven't thoroughly read the stuff that's supposed to be credited to the Hanifs and what their particular beliefs are yet. But this far, if you're talking about your bog standard pagan who went to Mecca and observed it, you ask any of them, hey, does this site have anything to do with Ishmael? And they just go, no, the Jurham built it. They're the ones who built it. Is he a Jurham that we don't know about?
Hey, I mean, maybe. Who knows? Right? Muhammad is all things to all people, or something like that. This was asked much earlier, or commented. I guess it's not technically a question. Much earlier, but I thought it would be really appropriate right now. Sheikh Khalil Abdel Karim mentioned in his book that there was more than one Kaaba in Arabia before Islam. Is that correct to your understanding, that there was more than one square building that people were journeying to worship at?
Well, I mean, there was a square building in Taif that was one of the goddesses that they went to, that we're about to talk about. So there were tons of square buildings. Now, were they the Kaaba of Allah? And I think that the Dul Khalasa would qualify, that that's probably Allah there. And I think that there may have been someone else, other folks who wanted to set up their own rival sites that got raided and killed for it. I think that what is happening here is as the pagan world was shrinking and there were fewer and fewer sites, and there was also a more institutionalization of pagan religious practices that for these tribes weren't really these organized things. This attempt at organizing them around these sites was being developed at this time, and that there were rival sites for this. I think that there are a lot less than there actually are reported in the sources, because again, like Al-Kalbi will claim that these places that were completely Christian totally had these inappropriate pagan gods who would have no business being in that location at any time, much less that time. Like, they're not from there. There was never people attached there ruling that area. Makes no sense for them to ever be there. So there's fabrication of the level of paganism in Arabia at this time. But at the same time, I do think that there really were some rival Kaabas, and that what the Islamic fairy tale is trying to tell is that they were all these very different pagan worshippers of tons and tons and tons of gods, very different than Islam. And Muhammad came and purified it back to the true religion of Abraham. But what the reality was is that they already had wanted to have a way to answer to the rhetorical power of Christianity by saying that our God is as good as your Christian God, because he's this God who has 3 daughters, essentially. And that what the Quraysh were doing were capitalizing on that. And also, they were also just starting to bring in more syncretic Christian type things. They were the ones, the pagans were the ones who brought in an image of Mary and Jesus and put it inside the Kaaba. They were the ones who brought in all the Byzantine icons and put them inside the Kaaba to say that, yes, this is the God of 3 daughters and also of Jesus. And that was the kind of thing that they appear to have been teaching at that time to try to unify the Arab tribes for their trade benefit, for their prestige, both. And distinguishing between wealth and prestige is very difficult in this kind of environment, because so much is dependent upon your distribution of wealth to other people as well as your receiving of it, and what they were trying to set themselves up to be as a new power base to replace the Kinda, who had fallen apart in around 550. So Kinda had completely controlled this enormous area of Arabia and had pretty much unified it up until about AD 550, and they want to do the same thing. So yeah.
So
yeah,
Houston summarizes it summarizes the Islamic theory for us. The theory is that Abraham built the Kaaba so that pagans can use it for 3,000 years to preserve it for the pure monotheism of Muhammad. Totally logical. I don't see why, as the Muslims told me earlier in the day, that this makes perfect sense. I don't know why anyone would object to such a crystal clear and airtight theory. I mean, gosh. You have to be Islamophobes to look at facts.
Yeah, this is one thing that is kind of frustrating about the theories that, oh, well, there was a Mecca and it was in the northwest. Guys, because Abraham never went to the Hijaz. Yeah. Abraham never went to any Mecca. This was the only Mecca that there ever was. Abraham was never here. The story of Abraham is just a complete, Muhammad farted it out of his rear end. Okay? It's a lie. He made it up. It was a recently made up thing. Muhammad, who had virtually no concept of geography, the Quraysh, who were so stupid that the Romans convinced them that the governor in Basra was actually, or Bosra, I should say it differently than the Basra over in Iraq, but in Bosra, the head of a particular province, they managed to convince these people that the emperor was there because they didn't want these barbarians to even know where the emperor was, and they were stupid enough to believe them. This is how backwards these folks were. And he made it up. No, there never was Abraham anywhere close to Mecca, not to this Mecca. This was the only Mecca there ever was. This is the only Kaaba there ever was. Abraham never went there. Quit trying to move it to where Abraham might have possibly passed by, because it never happened. Muhammad just made it up to try to make it legitimate. This entire project is to make these backwards pagans a legitimate monotheistic religion. They're not legitimate. There is no legitimate connection. It is entirely made up. It is imaginary.
So we can see here that Mary is very on the fence about whether this is a good theory or not. But before we move on, Muhammad Hijab does want to explain what happened that caused Muhammad to say these things.
What happens is that some involuntary excrement comes out of your orifice.
There you go.
That is basically it. And so then after you do this circumambulation of the Kaaba, you're supposed to then do Saye, which is running between Safa and Marwa. So you're supposed to do the running back and forth, right? So you're supposed to kiss the stone one final time after drinking your foul Zemzem water, although now it's beautiful and perfumed because it's not from Zemzem anymore. And you're supposed to start at Al-Safa. So you have to recite more invocations there at Al-Safa. And these are large stone outcroppings. They're basically natural beetles. So they're singular, sticking out outcroppings of stone, which were sites to be, which were appropriate sites for this pagan rock worship, right?
And these beetles have nothing to do with the black beetles that the water, the Zamzam water tastes like.
Right. Not the black beetles of the Zemzem, the foul-tasting Zemzem water that needs to be soaked in fruit so it isn't disgusting and is able to be drunk. So you're supposed to walk back and forth 7 times. It's really 3.5 because each half trip counts as a time. And there are certain portions that men, particularly, are supposed to run each time. Now, historically, the whole bottom distance was run, and you were supposed to do the same invocations at Marwa than at Safa. Now, Muhammad, like the pagans, climbed to the top of each one. So he climbed to the very top of this little outcropping, and he'd recite his stuff, climb to the bottom, and then he'd run the whole bottom distance in between. They pretend that he didn't now so that people won't get hurt climbing on it. So they altered that, and so now they like set out this different smaller distance to run, because it used to be you were walking the climb up and down so you didn't break your neck and then run the whole distance. So that's a way that they altered it so that the numbers of people can actually make this trip and that nobody dies. So the pagans
so the
said
power
very
washers,
yeah, yep.
and so the power washers don't have too much work to do.
Yes, yes. And the feet of the people would have completely worn it away by now. That's why it's so polished, by the way. If you notice, like it's super polished from people climbing over it for many hundreds of years before they went where this is not a good idea and put up barriers. So the pagans said various poetic lines during the running part. Now, then you would do bonus prayer in the masjid area again. We don't know whether or not there's any sort of equivalent to that. You're supposed to leave stepping out with your left foot first and recite another invocation. So that way your dirty part will leave first and will enter last, essentially. Only if you're doing Umrah would you have your hair trimmed if you're a woman, or if you're doing a double Hajj Umrah, or you'll have it shaved if you're a man and you're doing only Umrah alone, because you have to retrim and reshave, or retrim or do your total shape later if you're double dipping for double points. So this is an ancient pagan tradition which Arabs were known very well for. So the stuff about cutting the sides of your beard and cutting the sides of your hair in that Jews were forbidden to do are associated with these sorts of pagan rituals of the Arabs and their neighbors. So if you're doubling, you then get to leave your sacred clothing state until the 8th day. When you go back into it again, redoing the steps, that's a lot easier than saying an ihram, and so it's called the pleasure Hajj. But for some stupid reason, you get more Allah credit because it counts for both Umrah and Hajj. So you can get extra special points if you don't leave ihram in between, in which case you do Saye only once, and then the second time you can do it one or the other, and not doing it now but doing it later is then considered the most recommended. Anyway, Muhammad invented this double dip. The pagans may have also done this so that they could trade in the time between the first and last periods of their Hajj, because there was some sort of taking off of ihram for trading or in association with trading purposes in some context. It's hard to deduce from the various reports of what the pagans did what was really meant by that, because they're repeating things that the folks don't even really understand anymore. So it's this weird echo content where you have to like really parse what's being said and what on earth was originally meant by it. So it's not entirely clear. So
so before you go on, I wanted to comment on this phrase as well. You got to be very careful with saying the pleasure Hajj, because that might mean something different to certain Muslim men who think
it is the same words. That's the funny thing. It is muta. It's not nikah muta. It's Hajj al muta, right? So,
but as I was saying, it might mean something different to Muslim men who are expecting all their sins to be forgiven when they touch or kiss the black stone, and thus will assault women on their way to touch the sacred stone.
Well, as soon as you get to take off your ihram, you can go off and have lots of sex again. So maybe that is what he meant by pleasure Hajj, because you're allowed to have sex in between the two parts. So, the pagan circumambulation was very common, and it was in order to honor or worship a deity. It's very, very, very ancient. When God, Yahweh, told the Israelites to circle Jericho, it was a polemic against the pagan gods and their pagan practices, right? So this Tawaf of God destroyed one of the most ancient pagan sites in the entire world, which is full of some of the most ancient and complicated pagan rituals in the world. This is reenacted yearly in the Feast of the Booths. It's basically our true God destroys the false gods using their own methods. Again, sorry, on vacation while writing this. The Islamic Tawaf is just a continuation of the pagan Tawaf. It is what God, Yahweh, staged a visual polemic against. It does not come from Jerusalem, but is exactly what God is rejecting by destroying Jericho. For saying, oh, there's a similarity between what Jews did at the Feast of the Booths and what Muslims do. Yes, that's not because Mecca was Jerusalem or Islam has anything to do with Jerusalem. It is because God was acting against what the pagans did. That he is saying, hey, I will destroy your false gods that you circle when my people circle your sites that you consider holy. Jericho, at the time that it was taken over, was a very, very, very minor town. In the early, it was so minor that in the early uh, Iron Age, some people said, originally they said, well, we don't think that there's a town here at all. Nothing was here, nothing was destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. The only town, there was a much later Iron Age town, and then there was the big Bronze Age, and then before that, the Neolithic. It was huge in the Neolithic era for its time. It was quite small. But it did exist. They found it now. Did exist, did have a stone wall, but it was small. Why would God use such a small site for one of the biggest moments? Well, it's because of its ancient roots, because everyone knew that it was super ancient. It had all these claims to having connection with gods and so on and so forth, being this very ancient, very religious site. And that's why it was chosen, even though it wasn't a particularly large city at that moment, for this particular display of God's power. Not really against the people of Jericho, but against the gods that they worshipped and that they circled. Right? So now the running back and forth was a pagan action of worship, just like Tawaf. So they were running back and forth from one beetle to another, these stone outcroppings that functioned as gods. They were outside the Kaaba, which belonged only to Allah / Hubal / the moon god / Wad, whatever you want to call him. He belonged to one god. The space outside could belong to other gods. These belonged probably two different gods, and they'd run back and forth between the two gods. And so, yes, they weren't mountains. They're called mountains, but they weren't mountains. They're called that now to kind of hide the fact that they're actually these pagan beetles. Let's just call them mountains instead. So the story of Hagar was applied to this pagan ritual only to try to depaganize it. Yes, it is a stupid story. Yes, it makes no sense. That's because the ritual, the pagan ritual, came before the story. The story is entirely made up. Now, so keep in mind that you would have to climb a minimum of 7 mountains to complete this, perhaps 8, okay? So, and the folks who are like saying that, oh, well, since they're not mountains, let's go to a place where there actually is mountains. Well, Dan Gibson tries to place them as 2 great mountains in Petra. I have not been able to figure out. I'm sure he says it's somewhere which 2 great mountains these were. An alternative theory makes them Scopus and Moriah in Jerusalem. Scopus at most shares 2 letters with Safa. Moriah, and in one particular version of it, Moriah also shares 2 letters with Mara. They're not equivalent. The distance is 18.2 kilometers or 11.3 miles between the top of Scopus and the top of Moriah if you're going back and forth that many times, okay? The total climb is nearly 2,000 meters. It's around 6,400 feet. That's higher than Mount Washington. It's the 18th highest mountain ascent in the U.S. It's higher than Pikes Peak. Mount Hood is not that much higher. It's 7,706 feet from the bottom of it to the top. I'm talking about the climb in terms of actual climb, not the elevation. So it is physically impossible that this was something that people could casually do in an afternoon, and that entire tribes would do, and children would do, and old people would do, and fat Sauda would do without any problem. Like, she'd take a little bit extra time, but she could do it. She could do it because it wasn't that hard. This is not like a major climb. And imagine, you're supposed to run a good portion of this, right? Run this. These would be like the Olympics of Hajjs if these were actual mountains. No, they're these little pagan beetles that you climb to the top of one beetle, shout whatever you're supposed to shout, climb down, run across, occasionally shouting whatever you're supposed to shout in a gentle jog, and then climb to the top of the next, shout, and then repeat. It only works if they're these small places. It cannot possibly be physically possible to go up these distances. And yes, Protestant believer, if you're talking about the above sea level, Pikes Peak is much higher above sea level, but we're talking about the distance of climb from the base to the top, like the distance from your starting point as you go up. So your actual gained height, right? And yes, it does make a difference that being above a 14er, it's harder to breathe, et cetera, but still, yeah,
I mean,
there's still
the real point is the
about,
distance you would have to ascend. And remember, you're supposed to do this multiple times.
Well, this is the total.
In a row.
Yeah, this is summing each.
Gotcha.
Counting
you're,
7.
You're saying it's equivalent to.
Yeah. Counting 4 climbs on one plus 3 climbs on the other, which is the minimum. It could possibly be an additional climb. But at minimum, it is like doing that level of climb. Okay?
And I'm sure that
I don't know about you. Like, if you are doing 11.3 miles of mountain, that's pretty tough. I could do it, but little kids can't. Older people can't. People who aren't in good shape can't. And it would be difficult, right? So
I'm sure that we all benefited greatly from knowing that Mount Washington is the 18th tallest mountain in the United States. Very useful information there. But Mark Fish says maybe it's more like Magic Mountain than Disneyland. Could be.
So this is about it's not about the height of the mountains. It's about the ascent. So the amount of the ascent from the bottom to the top, not the elevation. So to be clear, because somebody's going to come back and go, that's not the highest. So, but it's the equivalent of that. So it's saying that every year, all the people are going to do this, and that's what the ancient thing was. No, it couldn't have been. That's insane to say that this makes any sense whatsoever to go, oh, it must be real mountains. No, it absolutely cannot be real mountains based on what Muhammad did this in his farewell Hajj when he was nearly dying, right? It's supposed to be plausible. Even if Muhammad didn't exist, right? It's supposed to be plausible to the people who were doing it then that this is what is going on. So,
yep, we got it.
So we were really talking about kind of what was done at today, but what was done in ancient times before that 8th day of the Hajj, the 8th day of the month, right? So the question is, why is there this big delay between the first day when you're supposed to recognize the Hajj and the 8th day? Well, it turns out that Qudayd, where the Manat idol was, is almost exactly an excellent distance to travel to and from in a total of 8 days. So you could have started out at Mecca, gone from Mecca to the Manat idol, because remember, our three lovely ladies that we need to find who are important to the people who are doing this pagan Hajj loop was Manat and Al-Uzza and Alat. So it's also noted that the tribes of Yathrib, who weren't Hums, they were the Hilla group, not the Hums. They were in Qudayd on the 1st of the month, and they declared their intentions for Mecca from there. So, and here Ibn Kathir is just calling the temple there a Kaaba because they started kind of extending it to any of the temples. But Manat has her own sanctuary, her own holy place, and so they would start their own Hajj from next to Manat. So they would see the moon, they would give their Talbias at Manat, and then they would do their stuff at Manat, and then they would go into and Yathrib, by the way, is Medina, for those who don't know. And then they would go into Mecca and then start their own traditions there. So remember that Hilla are the ones, they observe this Hajj route but they might, each pagan group might do it in their own way. Hums was an attempt to apply stronger Meccan supremacy over the other sites and trying to get everybody to do everything in the same order, which no one did, right? So, you want to put back on, so in modern days, when you're not going to the idol and you're just hanging around for however long, you need to put back on your ihram if you had taken it off. You can do it inside Mecca this time. And doing the steps assigned to officially taking on the stay of ihram inside the Masjid al-Haram is considered to be the best way of doing it. You can't forget to keep repeating your Talbia this whole time, right? Then you have to travel. Yeah.
I said definitely. You can't forget to say the magic words.
Right. Never forget it. Then you have to travel to Mina, which is about 8 kilometers or 2 hours walk away. And notice it is imperative that women don't leave with a walking group without her husband. So they should never be without their husbands here because of the extreme danger of the Hajj for women. And there are many, many repeated examples of these types of warnings on modern Hajj sites, which amuse me. You do your noon prayers and onward in a shortened traveler form throughout this time. All of this is, of course, modern Islamic practice. You do lots of invocations and supplications while staying in the air-conditioned tents. Men and women are in separate tents, but they're interspaced so that you can be next to your wife through a tent wall, essentially. You can choose to visit the mosque there if you wish. Obviously, the mosque is new. Did not exist at that time. The boundary of Mina is called Muzdalifa, and you're not supposed to go out on particular days from the boundary here, right? Unless your sleazy tour operator tricked you. But then if he tricked you and put you outside, which should technically violate your the validity of your entire Hajj, it's okay. Don't make a fuss. It's fine. We're going to ignore that.
Yeah. You know, when you have magic word formulas and such, you're getting the words right and the rituals right. That doesn't really matter. It's all about the thought that counts, I'm sure, in paganism.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Definitely.
So then you're supposed to do your dawn prayer at Mina. You add a special extra invocation, but not other extensions to it. Women had better use a soft voice whenever they do it. They better not be heard. Everyone has to say this invocation aloud, but women, don't let men hear your sexy, sexy voice, or else
or we might have another pleasure Hajj.
Right. So
pleasure Hajj.
You have to do a special cleansing here, or possibly at Arafat. Then you go to the plain of Arafat and combine the noon and afternoon prayers. Used to be by foot, but now it's by bus because it's as far as 8 miles, given where they are now putting the tents. It used to be usually only 5 miles. But you want to arrive by the noon prayer, but you absolutely have to arrive before the next dawn prayer. There you stand and do a combo noon-afternoon prayers in your travel mode. This is the site of the farewell sermon, so there's a khutbah to listen to if you want to, and the same special invocation is added kind of in memory of that. Then in the late afternoon, everybody stands and holds their hands out and faces the Kaaba. You must stay until sunset. There are tents for resting during the day, although people are encouraged to stand. Then you do an evening or night prayer at the border of Muzdalifa. So you're supposed to, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong because I did not look it up. I apologize. So you're supposed to do it at this special border place, and this is going to be a very important place in a moment, right? Then you sleep outside overnight and spend the whole night in a vigil there. Women have to stay close to their men. Make sure you're staying close. You collect your 49 pebbles while you're there. You do Dawn Salah, and then you do some standing. It's a special standing place for at least a moment before you go on. Now, again, modern system. You do the pelting of Al Jamara, the place of the pebbles, at Al Aqaba, and used to be 3 pillars. Now it's 3 walls. Only the big pillar was pelted on the first day and was pelted between sunrise and sunset, accepting the midday prayer. And you're supposed to do 7 pebbles at that time. Then you're supposed to, after pelting the big pillar only with 7 pebbles, you sacrifice the animals. And that's the Eid of the sacrifice, basically. And you're supposed to cut up your animals into equal parts for your family, relatives, and friends, and poor. You also are to shave and cut your hair between now and the 12th within the haram boundaries. So you're within the boundaries of Mecca at this particular place in Mina. And you're supposed to do your real cutting if you're a woman and the full shave if you're a man, because you only trimmed before if you did the Umrah. At this point. Then you travel back to Mecca to do the tawaf of visiting, and then you do your running back and forth if you're double dipping with an Umrah. And then you travel back to Mina again and spend the night at Mina once again. Now, all of this stuff seems awfully repetitive, right? You do an awful lot of repetitive things. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, what all these rituals remind me of? Pure, unadulterated monotheism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Definitely monotheism. That's definitely the sort of things we do. We do all sorts of things that don't really make sense and no one really understands anymore because pagans did them for so long. That's monotheism. So.
Yep. And this is from Billy earlier, but it's very appropriate here. All these pointless details make you feel like you've accomplished something after the ritual is over, does it not? And this is the beauty of Islam. You can do some weird rituals that the pagans used to do, and then you can say, I feel like a pure monotheist who worships Allah and Allah only, of course, and his messenger, but we'll leave that out.
Yeah. Now, here is something very interesting, is that you have the Hums and Hilla Hajj of the pagan era. There was a lot more to do there. There's kind of these weird things like, why are you out here at Mina? Why are you at Arafat? What does all this mean? Why are you leaving supposedly the most sacred place in the world? All right, doesn't really make sense. Well, you're leaving it because you used to be spending that time to go and see Alat and Al-Uzza, and now they've destroyed it, and so they still have that time to fill, and so they're filling it with other things. So they would pass the That Anwat, the owner of hung things, which is a pagan tree with weapons hanging on it. It's hard to tell whether or not it was separate from Al-Uzza or is just actually another name for the Al-Uzza shrine, because it could be at the intersection between the Hunain Valley and the Wadi Nakhla, and that would make it the exact same thing as the Al-Uzza shrine, because Al-Uzza was a tree on which the idolaters placed a monument and curtains. They're trying to say that, yeah, there was like an idol on there and curtains. Well, I'm sure that there were curtains because the pagan holy sites were generally covered with some sort of covering or curtains or something like that. But I don't think that there actually was an idol of Al-Uzza at all. Because, I mean, listen to that. Al-Uzza was erected on 3 trees in a forest, as if it's like balanced or something. Very odd. I think that these are just what would have been Ashura trees, more proper to Alat, as Alat and Al-Uzza kind of get run through a blender. The trees end up with Al-Uzza instead of Alat. And so we have the sacred trees of Al-Uzza that were inside Haram as well. And Khalid cut the 3 trees, approached the house built around it, and destroyed it. So house is probably Dar there, which would mean like a courtyard wall. So they would have originally sacrificed animals there, just like in that story, Bag of Meat, which I talked about with Muhammad, who had gone either to Al-Uzza or Alat and sacrificed animals there and then got reprimanded for being a pagan and how he should only sacrifice to Allah by one of the Hanifs. This would be one of the 2. We're not really sure which one he was sacrificing to, if not both. But this would be part of what's going on here. So in Taif itself, there was a house built around Alat. This is probably Dar again. In taif with curtains, servants in a sacred courtyard around it, and they would sacrifice animals there. So this is what was keeping that you need to have all of this make do and busy work to fill up the time that was originally spent visiting the daughters of Allah as part of the Hums Hajj, as well as the Hilla Hajj. So everybody used to visit everybody.
So what you're saying, just summarize, what you're saying is that they took the rituals, they removed some of the activity that surrounded other pagan deities besides Allah, and then came up with other stuff to fill that space, but kept the same amount of time in general.
Right. That is exactly what I'm saying. And then on day 9, you're supposed to gather at Arafat. And the reason why I have scare quotes around that is I think that Muhammad renamed the place. I think he decided that it ought to be Arafat after the biblical place where Noah landed. He's like, that's where Noah landed. We will call that is totally Arafat, because there are no references in the pre-Islamic poetry to this location under that name. It doesn't exist under that name, as far as I have been able to find. Could still be corrected, because searching is finding nothing. When you search, you don't necessarily know that you're completely done yet. But I suspect that this place was renamed by Muhammad. But anyway, you had to gather at this location that's now called Arafat, and you can't leave it until the custodian of Banu Tamim commands you to do so. So remember when I talked before about how Banu Tamim had specific roles and rituals and authority and power and all of this, and unlike that was especially for this particular tribe that was not Quraysh. So they had authority over certain rituals of the Hajj that the Quraysh did not have. So the custodian of this particular ritual stood over everyone and didn't let anyone go. And so Guillaume states that the command was a signal for a hot race to the neighboring sanctuary of Muzdalifa, where the sacred fire of the god Qusa burned. And I glossed this as Dushara or Kos. Now, whether or not they definitely knew that Qusa, at some point they knew that Qusa was the same as Kos. I don't know whether or not they knew for certain that it was the same as Dushara. These may have been different aspects in their mind that they may not have associated. But we have our old buddy, the Edomite pagan god here, who now has a sacred fire, and he has become essentially largely an archery deity that is burning at this place. And this is attested in other post-Islamic sources that, in fact, Muzdalifa was the site of Qusa's sanctuary, right, where there was sacred fire. It was not so much the permission to leave Arafah as to draw near to Qusa. The race itself is called the Afada. So this particular man was also in charge of the pelting at Mina, which did not begin until the sun went down. So now you're not allowed to pelt after sundown. But at that time, it only happened when the sun went down. Very interesting. Another night association that's being kind of pushed out and erased from the older tradition. Then he held them back and did not let them go until some other sign happened. So the sun would go down. He would not throw. He had to be the first person to throw. And when he had the authority, he would then throw the stone. And then after everybody else threw the stone, he'd still hold everyone back until some other sign came along. So is that the moonrise? What is he waiting for? Because first he was waiting for the sun to go down. Maybe he was waiting for the moon to rise or to reach a certain point or something like that. It's also interesting that Maysir, or games of chance, like the gambling in the Quran, right?
Yeah, I was about to ask that.
Yep, it is that same word. That seems to have been involved in the distribution of meat of the sacrifice. So while 50 camels suffice for Muhammad's largest Hajj of 2,000 people, there probably, supposedly 2,000, who knows how many there really were. There probably were a similar number, a similar ratio there. So the sacrificing of the animals was related to this drawing of lots which was associated with our buddy Allah, who was Hubal, who was associated with this gambling inherently as one of his characteristics. So different people would get benefits from the killing of the animal according to this drawing of lots system.
Come
So
to our games. We got games to chance. We got camels.
Yep.
Camels galore. Enjoy your meat, but only if you win.
Races and gambling. So there are all these races and gambling. So
Yeah,
today,
just like at the state fair. I mean,
yeah,
it's perfect.
So today, to fill up some of this time that was previously occupied by, we don't know what they did at our buddy Kusa's sacred fire. We don't know what their rituals were, then they are not recorded. But we need to fill up the time with more repetitions of stuff. So now you're pelting 3 pillars, one with 7 stones each, after midday and before sunset, because remember, we can't do it the way the pagans did it, right? So you have to pelt the smallest, do a little prayer, pelt the middle one, do a prayer, pelt the final one, but don't you dare do a prayer after pelting that final one. That's not part of the system. So in day 12, you do exactly the same thing again. And then day 13, you repeat, but now you need to hurry up and leave before sunset. If you haven't left before sunset on day 12, because that makes you get stuck there an extra day. Then you go back to Mecca, you do your farewell tawaf, and you do it without ever walking briskly. You drink more Zemzem, and you don't run back and forth between the 2 huge rock outcroppings. So,
as Jack here says, shoot the balloons, or in this case, the beetles 3 times, and you win a prize.
Yep. Now
and apparently your prize is a stripping hijab.
Yeah. Oh, goody.
Not a good prize. Send it back. Send it back.
So we have some missing rites that are alluded to in the pagan sources that we do not find in the we don't know what they did there. So we know that there was something to do with the cave of Al-Hira, or the cave of Hira rather, where Muhammad met his cave demon, right? So there were some sorts of rites that were associated with that, where the people of the Hajj would go out to that location because of the pre-Islamic poetry and Talbia, Talbiat, that talk about what they did, but we don't know what the rites were that they were doing there or who they were worshiping. So my wild guess would be that it might have something to do with the god Al-Khutbah, who was the god of writing, maybe, and it might even already have a Hermes type connection, because this was one of the more major gods who doesn't really reappear in the pantheon, but we have this huge emphasis on the god of writing in the Quran and the book, which just means the written thing. So I would strongly suspect that these are going to be, we're missing him somewhere. Maybe he was associated with this cave. That is utterly spitballing on my part, but I don't know where else he would be. It could be another lunar or solar guy, or some minor deity that we just don't have record of anymore because nobody cares about him anymore. It's also important to notice that some of the Hilla tribes would not cut their hair until they returned to the shrine of Manat. So remember that Hums is an attempt at pushing uniformity upon all the tribes to make them all observe the Hajj in a particular way, still a pagan way, but with this Mecca supremacy, more emphasis on Mecca. They probably instituted the extra circlings around of Mecca, or of the Kaaba and things like that. But yet some of the Hilla tribes still wouldn't cut their hair at Mina. They wouldn't cut their hair until they returned to the shrine of Manat, and they probably did one final sacrifice there or something. So this difference showed how the pagan different tribes were kind of trying to be unified into one at that time. So So the significance of the moon still carries over today. Ramadan ends up having qualities of a lunar feast period because you fast all day and you feast as soon as the sun goes down. And you have intercourse when the sun goes down and you celebrate the sun going down and all of this. It also begins
But
with,
remember that trans fasting is real fasting.
yes, yes, trans fasting is real fasting. I misspelled sighting here because I'm special. Anyway, it begins with Hilal, which is the sighting of the crescent moon. It ends with Eid al-Fitr, which is the next sighting of the crescent moon. So it's between two crescent moons again. And so again, yes, that does delineate the months, but it does still just reek of lunar aspects. So that is
All
it for
right,
this one.
excellent. We got a bunch of comments from the audience that I saved throughout. So we'll have, well, first of all, I will open it up for anyone who wants to join the chat on this topic. I do have an early morning tomorrow, so I do want to restrict it to actually relevant on topic chat today, so that if there isn't anyone who wants to actually, respond to what we had to say, that I can get to bed. So I pinned the link for that. Other housekeeping note, I had a poll going on. Should I start a Plagiar Islam meme? And if you don't, probably a lot of people watching did not see that. I was very at the start of the stream, but 85% in favor of that. So I will put that on the to-do list. All right, so I got a number of comments from the audience. I think that this, I'm not sure if this was a joke or it was in reference to something said, but I didn't quite catch why it was asked from HJ Evan. Is it haram to place a roof over the Kaaba? Kind of asking why this is a big open structure.
Because so the Kaaba was originally had no roof because they were like backwards pagans and didn't know how to put a roof on it. This is one of these things that it was totally in Petra because Petra is this wonderful site of sophistication. And I'm like, dude, these people did not have a roof over their holy site until 605, according to their own reporting. This was not a sophisticated people who are making sophisticated things. These are backwards people living in mud huts who have no grasp of anything. So they were finally able to get a roof over it at that time. And because they had already tried to make it kind of shaped like a Byzantine church, but they couldn't figure out how to incorporate the half round part in the end. So they just left it out. And then the funny thing is that Al-Hajjaj is said to have incorporated that, but even he didn't figure out how to because all of the people who were competent in architecture and construction, they didn't live in Mecca. Mecca was a backwater, right? They didn't live in this ridiculous place. So all the people who were competent in building, they were all far up north. And so whenever he incorporated it, he just made a bigger rectangle entirely around the old half moon shape, and then it got rebuilt again later. And I guess it was just kind of embarrassing that there was a rectangle around the half moon, and they brought it back to the previous shape of it, and left the half curved shape out of it. So yeah.
So yeah, Andrew says there's a hadith about a roof over the Kaaba. You mean there's a hadith saying there was a roof over it, or there's a hadith saying you shouldn't build a roof over it? If you could clarify, that would be great, because I don't know. I don't know if there's a reason why it's not covered other than they think it looks cool.
He says that Mo and a friend were smashing the idols on the roof of the Kaaba. And that's where the idols really seem to be. The idols seem to have been who aren't Allah. Hubal was inside. All of and by the way, that image of the goat head, that's something that Bedouins still hang up in their camps. They still hang up goat heads, and you'll find in some of these more backwards Arab places in North Africa, they'll put goat heads over doorways and stuff. but there were also the ram's horns inside of it, and then there were all of the icons that they managed to buy from, again, church rummage sales or something, and that's all that was inside it. But on top of it was where they had stuck a whole bunch of other idols. Like, we got all your idols here, we can't put them inside with Hubal or Allah, exactly the same, but we'll stick them on the roof to show that they like approve of Hubal or Allah. And by putting them up there, they also couldn't be stolen very easily because they were like safe.
I do have a theory as to why there's no roof over the Kaaba. As we all know, the Kaaba is the house of Allah, and you may or may not remember that at the start of COVID, a prominent Muslim cleric in 100% seriousness said that what they need to do is they need to go open the window above Muhammad's grave, because then his magic energy would go out and end COVID around the world. So I think what we're seeing here by some basic reasoning by analogy here is that if there was a roof over the Kaaba, then Allah's presence couldn't go out into the world. He'd be stuck inside and everyone would be just doomed as a result. That's my theory.
So Andrew, the reason that I think, well, first of all, I think that they were outside on the roof because we think of things being outside as being subject to rain and stuff like that. I don't think that it rains so little there, only a few times a day, that doesn't really factor in. Like, all of their kitchens were entirely outside because you just stay out of the way as long as it's raining, and then you can go back out and cook again because you just don't factor in rain. And the other, we find out that they had huge problems with people coming and stealing stuff out of the Kaaba anciently, and that the entire reason that the foundation was raised up a bunch and they put like step ladders up to the Kaaba with a locking door was so that it was harder to break into and steal all the stuff out of it. Because apparently that was a perennial problem. So they raised the foundation not to prevent the rain water from rushing through and washing it away, but to prevent people from breaking in. Because at night they would take down the steps, and I guess they'd shove them inside there's a council house. I guess they shoved them inside the council house and locked the doors to both to make it harder to just sneak in and steal the offerings, because they would give offerings of various stuff. In Muhammad's graves, there are dusty bones.
Well, maybe in his real grave, but in the site that is marked as his grave, I highly suspect that there is literally nothing there because they just made that up hundreds of years later. A super chat from Ray F.
O son of Adam, spend. I will spend on you. Give, then I will give you. It's difficult because you know what? These are my last few. As it is, the price is going up, the rand is going down, this is happening. Excuses. Those are excuses. You give and watch what Allah does.
No excuses, no excuses. And Ray F has no excuses. I believe this might be the first time he's been on the channel. First time I recognize the name for sure. And it was definitely his first super chat. So thank you very much for that. And he's not giving any excuses, but maybe Aisha has some excuses you were about to say.
I think Aisha knew darn well where his body was and kept it there in her house on purpose. So it would not be going anywhere. She knows he's dead and he can't come back. And her father, Abu Bakr, now has the power. Yeah, I think she made darn sure that she had control of his body. And she also basically kept the authority of who had access to his grave after he was dead. And she seems to have managed to get all the authority about who gets paid what in Medina for all of charity. She seems to have managed to get all that authority to herself. So she got to distribute charity to everyone and leveraged her relationship to Abu Bakr for that. So I think he's there because I think she made darn sure that she knew that she had control of his body.
So Jack Ray continuing the theme park theme here. He says, Muhammad's grave may have like a monkey's corpse dressed in as a mermaid, or maybe that was P.T. Barnum. I forget which one.
Nice.
I like it. I like it. We got a comment, very impressive research, excellent information. Thank you for that. Mark Fish said, jiggling women and gambling too in the desert. Is this Las Vegas? And then Houston says,
and there were lots of there were even buffets and stuff. So
ooh,
like
buffets.
there was a system where you'd have all the different pagan tribes were supposed to pay partly through donations or tithes, partly through money collected at the Ukaz fair that that would help fund this supposed free buffet for all the pilgrims, but really it was funded by outside people. Unless, of course, there was a drought, and then it would bankrupt the person who was in charge of that, who would otherwise be making a profit. That's what happened to Abu Talib. He used to be rich, then there was a drought, and people didn't pay up what they were supposed to pay, and so he's completely bankrupted himself paying for the pilgrims. When they came into Mecca, he had to provide them with a certain amount of food, and since they weren't paying their share, he got bankrupted and didn't ever seem to acquire the same level of wealth as before. But yeah, buffet of Las Vegas, got to come for the buffets.
And just remember, whatever happens on Hajj stays on Hajj. They don't call it the pleasure Hajj for no reason. Am I right?
Indeed.
All right. Comment, I have to admit, Islam's pagan origins is so much more interesting than Islam itself. You see, we are actually doing dawah. We're encouraging people to learn about Islam and realize that it actually is interesting. It's not just Muhammad's perverted sexual desires, although that is a substantial percentage of Islam, much more than the 5% of it that is violence, which I'll have a stream on Friday. Oh, sorry, shameless plug there. But a lot of Islam is Muhammad's perverted sexual thoughts, but the pagan origins, they're a good portion of it too, and they make it so much more interesting.
Yep.
Balrudder says, I missed the whole thing. We'll have to watch it again. Absolutely. You must watch it again or else. Una says, notice hijab is wearing a leather strap in that gift, but why? I thought the eyes were the leather strap at the anus.
Nice.
And Mark Fish, at Islamic Disneyland, there are rock rides and water sports with power washers.
Indeed.
Now, Jack Ray says, I guess Jericho had a fall vacation where the walls fell and it was vacated.
Very nice.
Not a great pun, not a great pun. But I did bring this up for a reason, because I wanted to ask you if this was why Muslims haven't used this, you know? Well, in the Bible, it says they circled Jericho.
Oh no, they have. I've heard them say it, and they got it. They got it from. Yes, I have gotten it. Well, they say that they do it at the Feast of Booths. That's what they say. They point to the Feast of Booths circling, but the Feast of Booths circling parallels the destruction of Jericho. It's a remembrance of destroying the pagan gods at Jericho. And so if you're and they are doing the exact same thing that the pagans did. That's what God is talking about. And the only reason, the funny thing is, the only reason that Muslims even know that this is a thing is because Christians have gone, oh, maybe it's connected to that, and maybe it's connected to Jerusalem because of that. No, it's not. It's the original. It's the pagan thing that God is talking about, the circling. And there is no special meaning in circling either clockwise or counterclockwise. You can't. I've heard people say that all the pagans circled counterclockwise. I'm like, or circled clockwise, and only the Jews and the Muslims circle clockwise. I'm like, show me evidence of that, please, because there is none. There is no specification that all circling was otherwise clockwise. It's just
okay. No. So I was trying to make a joke to make fun of how bad Muslim arguments are about the Bible, and then you're like, well, actually, they have done.
Yeah, they have.
I was trying to make fun of them, and I couldn't come up with a worse argument than the arguments Muslims actually advance.
No, but no matter how bad the argument is, you will hear it from Muslims, and often from Muslims first, and then some people will take it in some form seriously. But yeah, it's just ridiculous.
All right, so a serious question here. Una wants to know if you'll ever compare the Bible's end days with those of the Quran.
That is one of the funniest things. So I want you to go to the Quran, and I want you to look for all the times that Muhammad talks about there being pairs, and pairs and pairs and pairs. Allah creates everything in pairs. Now, the reason that this exists is that Muhammad somehow had access to a specific text that may have been based on the Diatessaron, may have been a separate hymn or something. One of the few things that he had heard included a list of things that is part of the end of the world imagery in Christianity. And it had in it the phrase, as in the days of Noah, but it never explains it. So it can't be the original Diatessaron. It can't be the original Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or anything like that, because it's explained what as in the days of Noah means. It means that some will be taken and some will be left, right? Some will be spared and some will be swept away. That is what as in the days of Noah means. It's defined immediately in the text right after Jesus says it. He had access to something that did not define what is meant by as in the days of Noah. And so he said things that what as in the days of Noah means is that souls will be paired up. So you'll find in one of the early surahs that has all of this end of the world imagery, there is a phrase, and the souls are paired. And it's usually mistranslated because it's so weird. What it means is that he thinks that you'll have the animals going 2 by 2 as before the Ark of Noah, and that will be your sign that the end of the world was coming. So if you look outside your window and you see 2 birds together and 2 squirrels together and 2 cats together and 2 ants together, that you will know that the end of the world is coming. And throughout the Quran, this became this weird theological thing where Allah makes everything in pairs except for him, and he's the one. And it's supposed to be this theological point that Allah is that which is not creation, because Allah does not have a pair, but everything else has pairs. So you have every animal is male and female. Every plant is male and female, he thinks. It's one of the reasons why the Quran absolutely cannot be a product of any kind of group that has any idea of how agriculture works, because Muhammad is absolutely convinced that there are boy wheat plants and girl wheat plants, and boy date trees and girl date trees, and that they're different. And only the girl date trees have date babies, right? That's what he thinks, because he just doesn't know. But this idea of there being pairs, that is part of the end of the days in the Quran. The other major factor of the end of the days is the belief that Isaiah, oh goodness, wait 1 second. I don't want to get it backwards. Oh goodness, wrong one. Why is that not doing? Hang on. But in Isaiah, whenever it talks about the mountains being thrown down and the valleys being lifted up, right? That here we go, Isaiah 43 and 4, 43 to 4. Okay. The voice of one calling, prepare the way for Yahweh in the wilderness, make a straight highway for our God in the desert. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground will become smooth, and the rugged land a plain. Muhammad read that specifically as being something associated with the end of the world. And so he would talk about how the world is going to be flat, and the mountains are going to be ground down to dust, ground down completely flat, because rather than this being applied to John the Baptist as being the precursor, the forerunner, John the Baptist, John the forerunner of Jesus and of the Messiah, instead, you will find that he thinks that this literally means that this is a sign of the end of the age, and that all of the emphasis of the flat earth and the earth's flatness and how that matters, and how the mountains will be made flat and everything will be ground down to dust and flat, that also comes from this misreading. And this shows very clearly how Muhammad has access to certain pieces of text. He doesn't have access to a comprehension of what these elements are. He doesn't have access to context, but he has heard certain things and he misunderstands everything all the time. And it's hilarious. So those are the two most important aspects of the end of the world in the Quran, are the pairing of the souls and everything coming in pairs, and this utter flattening of the flat earth so that there's no distinction between mountain and valley in a very, very literal way. And it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And this, again, is proof that the Quran has to come from Muhammad. Unless you are an individual with really stupid ideas, you would not come up with this. This could not be anything that a person who would have access to a coherent text could come up with. And it's so embarrassing. If you wanted to make the kind of claims that the Quran makes, then you would do a much better job of it if you had any kind of access, unfettered access to the Bible. You would at least not make claims that are completely and utterly wrong. You would say it was corrupted, right?
Just so everyone's clear, that was Mary's answer to a simple question: will you cover this topic, yes or no?
Yeah.
So yeah, Nur has come in here, hasn't watched a single thing all evening, and came in and said rubbish. We don't know what's rubbish, but something is rubbish, of course. Probably wherever, say, you quoted Muhammad, for example, that would be a good example of rubbish. As you just said in the chat, Islam is rubbish, absolutely. And Nur never rebuts anything. She just comes in and says words and then tries to talk about a previous stream, or, you know, says something completely unrelated. But, you know, maybe someday Nur will rebut one of our arguments. I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, there's also the question of the Dajjal. One of the funniest things about the Dajjal is that I ask...
Man, more end times.
I know, right? I ask Muslims, why do they say that the Dajjal has one eye and your Lord is not one-eyed? What would you normally confuse the Dajjal with? Like, why are they telling you that Allah doesn't have one eye but the Dajjal does? And they'll be like, well, it's so that you don't think that Allah is the Dajjal. I'm like, why would you think that? Because he's the Antichrist. He's the false Christ. The only way that you would confuse someone who looks like Christ with God is if Christ, what is it? Is God. And Muhammad, in all of Muhammad's sources, all the things that he was hearing, Christ is God. And thus, your Antichrist has the resemblance, will fool people into thinking that he is actually God. And that makes absolutely no sense in the Islamic context. The fact that you need to know that Allah has two eyes, but this false Christ has one, to tell them apart, or is not one-eyed. Excuse me. He most likely has three or more eyes, but that he's not one-eyed.
So Marion has a very crucial question, so we can all figure out the hour, other than looking for the moon to be split, of course. She says, if I get a wife for Lodbrok, my cat, is the end of the world?
Well, if you look outside and you find that your cat indeed has a wife suddenly, and that all the animals each have husband and wife sitting there, you know that Islam is true and the world's about to end.
And I think that this might just be a question about how to spell Dajjal, or what we're talking about exactly. So it looks like Mary's typing that in the chat. But the Dajjal is basically the Islamic version of the Antichrist.
And Dajjal itself is supposed to mean like false or fake or imitation or whatever. I haven't actually looked it up, but yeah, but you have to be warned that he doesn't look like that he isn't Allah. And you'll know that he's not Allah whenever you see Allah's shin. And Allah's shin is a reference to Revelation, where it is Christ who has a name written on his garment and also on his leg, on his thigh. That is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so it's actually, again, the shin of Allah is a reference to a vision of Christ, once again. Nice.
And
Logically, all is one.
yeah, Andrew says, since Muslims say, you know, Allah is absolutely one, well, that means he must have only one eye, because they tell us if God is composed of multiple persons, that means that he's three gods in the Trinity. So if Allah has two eyes, then he must be two gods. Therefore, he must have one eye. I think it's good. Breakfast Gun wants to know if he's a cyclops or a pirate, though.
Well, the Dajjal is supposed to be a pirate rather than a cyclops. So
good to know. Good to know. Villainous asked the question is, what is Allah getting from this? The rituals around the Hajj, and Andrew Martin said stoned, obviously, which is why he is the high god of Islam.
Oh my goodness.
Good job, guys. Super chat from Harry L. Johnson.
And Allah will bless you in a million ways. You find the tree will grow and you will have lots and lots of wealth. This is the example that we gave to the children. And I'm letting you know that when you sow that seed by giving, you shall receive much more than you gave by the will of Allah. Give as much as you can, for indeed you will reap much more than you have sown.
And well, first from Hariel, it says, Jesus Christ is the truth, the good shepherd that shall again appear. Amen to that. But Andrew Martin wants you to know, give to Mufti Menk and watch as Allah increases his bank account. Just watch what Allah will do. You give and watch what Allah will do to my bank account. I think it's perfectly good. And thank you for that super chat, Hariel. Villains wants to know, why are they still circling the Kaaba? Are they asking Allah to destroy it? Well, I don't know. I mean, I was trying to make a joke, but then Mary says this is an actual argument that Muslims use, so maybe they are trying to destroy the Kaaba like Jericho is destroyed. I don't know. All right, follow up from Andrew. The tree will grow when you give Mufti Menk money. His trees will grow for sure. Hold up, I'm off topic. Well, Una, then you must be a Muslim coming into the chat if you're off topic, because that's the only thing that I can count on for Muslims, is that whatever the topic is, they'll talk about something else. If we talk about, say, child marriage, one of their favorite subjects, then they'll bring up the Trinity or something like that. If we talk about the Trinity, then they'll bring up the age of Aisha. It doesn't matter. You know, they'll come in on this stream on the Hajj and they'll be like, you Islamophobes, what's wrong with you when you say that Muhammad was a warlord? Like, not what we're talking about, but thanks for showing your guilt.
Oh, here's a good question. Masi Muslim says the very first individual to endorse Muhammad's prophethood was a Christian named Waraqah ibn Nawfal. What part did he play in influencing the Quran? Well, here's the issue. He is a Christian according to Islamic sources. Also, according to Islamic sources, somehow he is able to write as much as the Injil in Arabic that Allah wishes him to write. How did he have that ability? How is he writing the Injil in Arabic? That would be my question for you. Is he also getting messages from Allah? He clearly did not have any kind of anything like an orthodox theology, but he probably thought that he represented some sort of belief in Isa, who is not even the correct name that would be normally associated with Jesus, but rather was a form of the word of the name. It's not even a form of the name. It's a different word that has a theological meaning in the dialect of Arabic into which it was originally adopted, but by the time it gets to Mecca at this time is kind of a nonsense word, nonsense noises. So he probably thought that he knew something about Isa. He probably thought that he had a familiar spirit who was teaching him about Christianity. He probably had a few basic documents. I think that these are the very sources. I think he had a fragmentary Isaiah 40, and he had the original of the hymn or poem or whatever that combined the end of the world things together into one hymn or whatever in a way that left out the details so that Muhammad could misunderstand what as in the days of Noah meant and utterly misunderstand that, because you really would have to have something that would have word for word as in the days of Noah, but then not have the explanation. And the only real explanation for that is having access to a hymn or something that has these parallel passages combined into a song about like what's going to happen at the end of time. So I think that those are really the only kinds of documents that I think that you can make a case for Waraka having access to, other than a vague understanding of perhaps a few major personages who are biblical. He definitely didn't understand what was in the Injil versus what was in the Torah. Like he didn't know, or Muhammad would know, and the Quran would know. So we know tons of things about what he didn't know, but he knew very little. And the reason why the prophecy ceased is that he no longer was able to give Muhammad any sources anymore. He couldn't tell him anymore. He could no longer sit there and teach him. He may have had some Gnostic-y stuff, but actually most of the Gnostic-y material seems to date from quite a bit longer after Waraka died. So whether or not he was more Gnostic-y or just plain pagan and thought he was getting a jinn from Allah who told him about Isa or whatever is kind of unclear. He definitely collected writings, right? So it's what he doesn't know is much more obvious than what he did know.
Definitely. Cecil summed up the show for us today. Muhammad never left his pagan roots. He just gave it a new name.
Yep.
But John Scott has a fake response here. Daif history, Mary. You're making it up. You don't know Arabic. You don't know Islam. My faith is stronger than when this episode started.
Very nice. Excellent. Excellent Islamic arguing there.
He also has a real question. Can Mary tell us if there's any connection to the goat / Hubal and Azazel from the Bible?
I don't think so. I don't think that there's any direct connection there. Whenever the scapegoat was released into the desert, it isn't, I think, a true reference to any sort of particular demon or pagan god or anything like that. I think it's just the way the phrase is used. So, and the goatness was actually picked up pretty late. Not sure when Carthage was founded, but it was picked up pretty soon before then.
And a new comment here from John. Waraka was an idiot, according to al-Bukhari. In Sahih Hadith, Waraka told Muhammad the angel that choked him in Hira was the same angel that appeared to Musa. The angel of Yahweh isn't Gabriel.
Yeah, it doesn't even say that. There is no reference to an angel in the Waraka story. That is mistranslated and made up to make Muhammad look more plausible. So when Muhammad was going to Waraka, there is no reference to Muhammad actually meeting an angel at that point. Instead, what it says is this is the same namus, which means law. This was the same law that came to Musa. There is no angel in Waraka's words. So the idea that this is the same angel that came to Musa isn't in the text. It's in a deliberate mistranslation.
Well, John says that Waraka is the idiot, but apparently it's the translator trying to make Muhammad look better who messes up there. So Ariel said Waraka died and the revelation stopped. And yes, that is a Orthodox Islamic belief. It's one of the many times that Muhammad tried to commit suicide is after his uncle died, and for some reason the revelation stopped for a period, which is very strange that the death of his uncle would cause revelations to stop, unless, of course, Muhammad was getting the revelations from Waraka and the demon that he was channeling.
Yeah, it's Khadija's
cousin.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so like his
cousin.
distant whatever cousin, because they're all inbred. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking his uncle, but cousin is correct there. So my bad. So Peter 2 says, I blame Khadija for Muhammad's false prophethood.
Yeah.
Well, okay, you go ahead and answer first, Mary, because then I want to say I have a new theory.
Yeah, I think Muhammad was trying to become the prophet all along. I think that that's what he was wanting to do. There were a number of figures before Muhammad who were trying to be religious reformers in such a way to get Mecca the support of Rome and to maintain independence from Sasanian Persia, which was encroaching in the area, and to get them to become a legitimate foederati, not a legitimate, but to get them to come into that relationship with them. And so they were trying to negotiate out some sort of system in which they could preserve their special place as a pagan Hajj destination and yet still get the monotheistic bona fides that they needed to be able to get the acceptance by Rome. So Muhammad's immediate experience, that's very clearly a paralysis sleep demon and would be interpreted that way by every single ancient person who ever lived in the history of the world. There's no one who would interpret you are lying down between waking and sleeping, and a dark, sinister presence comes to you. You cannot move. You feel enormous pressure on your chest and get a sinister message spoken to you, and you can't actually make anything out except for a dark, shadowy figure. Like no ancient person in the history of the world would consider this to be anything other than a demon of sleep paralysis demon. They all had words for it. Every single culture, that's what they would interpret it. That's what they'd say it to be. So while Khadija is responsible for and convincing him that that particular moment was not demon possession, I think that at some point or another he would have convinced himself he was a prophet, because he was very much trying to at that point.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that. Muhammad was in that cave because he was trying to connect with the spiritual world, and well, he succeeded, but his initial impression was correct. He got a demon. However, I also have a new theory, which I will be exploring in an upcoming video in response to the recent attempts at porn jihad. And that theory is that Islam exists because of Muhammad's sexual deficiencies. He invented this religion to cover up his sexual problems. So stay tuned for that. It should be a fun one and half serious. Snoopy says, are the Jiggle girls married and accompanied when they run around that building?
They are married but unaccompanied. They're jiggling around by themselves, and they're telling other people not to look at them.
So you see, this is why Islam was needed, because we know that those women needed guardians, and without them, who knows what would happen to them. So good thing that Islam came and totally changed this practice. Tony wants to know where Mary's hijab is. That is haram.
Haram! Don't do that, it's a sin!
Indeed, I specifically have a style that Muhammad condemned for women. Women are not to wear turbans.
And the very strict Muslim women, they won't even wear colors. They just black only, keep it as boring as possible. So, I mean, Mary's just like basically the same as one of those jiggly girls going around the Kaaba.
I am clothed, but I appear naked because I am still so seductive by wearing colors and makeup. I'm sure that all you men can hardly control yourselves around me and are just being driven mad by lust as Muhammad would expect you to be.
Indeed. And Balrudder says, I'm guessing there's no Bloody Marys in Vegas, Mecca, unless it's real blood.
Plenty of that with all the sacrifices.
Indeed, indeed. I reactivated Islamic mode because I accidentally turned it off by removing the comment, because when I put a comment up, it resets the screen so that it can adjust it if something is, so it won't cover things. But that also means that if I accidentally do it while that is activated, that will mess everything up. Nathan says, Viva, Viva, Viva Las Mecca. World Made by Physics says this was awesome. I'd be sure to watch it again. Yes, you will. Everyone must watch this again to get all the information out of it. And let's see. And Marion says, how can people bring themselves to ask other people for money? It's very simple. All you do is you take a look at the money in your bank account and you pretend it says $0, no matter what amount it actually says. Then you say, oh, people, please give me money. I need money or my ministry is going to come to an end. This is so bad. Allah is not providing, but he'll provide for you if you donate now. Send your big checks, big, big, big checks. See, not hard at all.
Excellent. Very excellent. So we still haven't got a single Muslim who wants to come up here. Yep. And wants to defend Islam.
Yep. Open spot for Muslim colors.
Yeah, these topics are really, really not getting many Muslims wanting to come up and actually talk about them. They want to talk about other things. But it's actually really funny because it's almost any subject I do, if I'm doing something on that subject, they don't want to talk about the subject. So if you want to talk about some other subject, if there are Muslims hiding out in the chats, go for it. We'll talk to you about something else because we're running out of time.
Yep, we'll be up. We'll end it here just very shortly. I've pretty much gone through the comments I wanted to highlight. Yahya says, I think he's saying that he wants me to say, you're boy. I'm not quite sure, but I think that's what he wanted. So there you go. Hijab driven and lust.
Mad with lust.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I knew it was a typo, but I was thinking it was A-N-D, but no, M-A-D. Hijab driven mad with lust, just like all Muslim men. Well, I shouldn't say all. That's unfair generalization. It's only like 95% or something. And I don't want to.
It's only if you're actually focused on your religion, because the whole religion is for you to be obsessively thinking about all the houris that you will have intercourse with forever, and the little boys who don't bleed.
Yep, and Tony confirms you're very naked right now, which is just such a shame. Carol says she's getting mighty tired of the part-time stripper.
You're going to encourage people to do it more. Poor Carol.
It's funny, we have 47 redeems today. Some days there'll be like 3, and then today we got 47. It seems to be like all or nothing. Either people like go crazy and do it the whole time, or they don't do it at all. And today was a go crazy and do it all the time.
Yep.
Highlighted comment from Houston. Were there any of Muhammad's mistakes identifiable as misread that can't be mishearing?
So I do think that some of them are identifiable as either reading or hearing specific phrases. Most of the things that he has are just ideas. He's heard something vague, right? But the thing about the souls being paired has to be either a mishearing or a misreading of as it was in the days of Noah. So we need to have some very, very specific phrase about the end of the world equated to Noah without an explanation as to what that means for Muhammad to get the misunderstanding that he gets. But that doesn't mean that he read it. And I think that Muhammad's literacy was like the literacy of many people then. Like you could sit there and puzzle things out and you could sit there and like scratch something out given enough time, but you weren't really a reader. So Muhammad did have some access to literacy, but it was very, very limited. But you know, as to whether or not he could, you can absolutely say that he did not have access to things like the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus in any written form, or he wouldn't have not known how long it was. There would have been some way to figure that out in the text if it had a written text, if this was written by whoever from a written text. And there would be a certain number of boys in the story. It would be a 7 or 8 in all of the early sources. The ones that have lesser numbers seem to be much later and seem to actually be encouraged by the Islamic version of the story. So there are a lot of things that he doesn't know that makes it obvious that he did not have access to any written version of it, but had only heard of it orally. But when it comes to very, very specific phrases, you can't say whether or not he saw that written or heard it. I would guess that that would be something that he got from Waraqah, that where things are based on specific phraseology. The only things that I can tell that Muhammad has explicit access to is some end time poem or hymn that has certain specific phrases in it, and also Isaiah 40. And that is all that I can say that he seems to have clear textual dependence on. Everything else is kind of is easily stuff that's just remembered and half remembered and done from having heard it. The kinds of things that, like, if I hear something once and I'm trying to tell somebody a story I heard once, like the kinds of mistakes that I would make in retelling a story that I heard once, are the kinds of mistakes that he makes identifiably in most of them. So most of them really, really seem to be oral. And that's part of the problem with saying that the Quran comes wholesale from someone like Al-Hajjaj or Abdul Malik. Yes, I absolutely do believe, according that the number of accusations that are aimed at Al-Hajjaj and Abdul Malik mean that they mucked heavily with what we have today is not really the Rasam of Uthman, it's really the Rasam of Ibn Mujahid. But the basic form of it is pretty much the Rasam of Al-Hajjaj and Abdul Malik. But they had material that they were taking from that truly was from Muhammad, and it couldn't be from someone who's educated, from someone who's sophisticated, who has seen these things that are written down, who had access to written things, because you wouldn't screw it up in the way that he does. The way that he does overall is that most of the stuff that he knows are from oral sources, and the orality of his sources show that Muhammad was a false prophet.
We'll wrap up here in a second. Just a couple quick comments. Colton says, might have to buy a shop and have it full of pork in Mecca. And sorry, you can't do that. Unless you're Muslim, you're not allowed to enter the city. So have to come up with a different plan. Watchman for today says it's deliberately garbled. It's supposed to sound mystic, but it's just dumb. And, that's debatable. Maybe Muhammad is just that poor at poetry, or maybe he's doing it on purpose. Who knows?
It's supposed to be mystical, but it's also supposed to be clear. That is its special quality is its clarity for his particular audience. That is the proof that it comes from Allah, is that it is clear. Whereas the stuff that existed for other people, you guys can't understand it. It's not in pure Arabic for you. It's not your book. This is your book, and it is absolutely clear for you. Now, the fact that it wasn't was just Muhammad doing a very poor job, but that would it being mumbo jumbo would make it transparently false, because its own proof is its clearness. Its clarity has to be there, or it's false.
Which is why you got the random letters at the start of certain Quran chapters, which everyone knows the meaning of, right? So, super chat from Jack Ray.
If you frequently say it, Allah would pay off your debts. So you can refer to it back again, inshallah.
I agree. Just keep saying points, 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 points. Allah's going to pay off all your debt. Thank you very much for all your support. Peter, too, asks if the Dawa guys on YouTube get paid. And I'm sure it varies. Some of them certainly do. There probably are some who don't. I mean, some of them are just trying to get more rewards from Allah. They're not all trying to get money, but some of them, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, I actually think that Daniel Hakikachu actually is a true believer. I think that the formative experience in his life was the death of his sister, and he thinks that all of the foul, disgusting, revolting things that he espouses are the moral correction that would prevent the horrible thing that happened to his sister, when we very well know that it would not, and that killing women, doing horrible things to women is something that happens every day in Islamic countries. They're just considered private matters, and so they are privately buried for the most part. If it was done by a brother, father, or husband, she just died. So let's just bury her. It's a private matter.
So, Colton, what the heck are you saying? Thought it was Thaddeus at first, stripper. Are you saying that you thought the stripper was me? I hope that's not what you're saying. And he also said Mary is right and Thaddeus. So we have Mary here, she's right, and Thaddeus is also there. One, perhaps final comment, maybe I'll take one or two more after this, but Alyssa on Fire makes a good point here. Waraka and Muhammad and Khadijah never said the Shahada, or never roared the Shahada. That is really interesting, right? That Muhammad is like, you have to say these magic words.
No, he wasn't, though. That's the thing. I don't think that there is one single person during Muhammad's lifetime who said the full Shahada in order to become Muslim. You did say that there is no God but Allah alone, and other various things and combinations, but the Shahada as it exists now, being the marker for coming into Islam, that was the Rashidun Caliphate. So, and there's also the fact that in early Islamic theology, the Caliph was the spiritual successor of Muhammad, who was equally entitled to give spiritual laws. That's why Muta marriage was ended by Umar and is followed by the Sunnis to this day. Though they've fabricated a few hadith before then that said that, oh, Muhammad was the one who ended them. But it was absolutely Umar and their theology that they had. And it was part of the Ridda Wars. The Ridda Wars was, we don't have a caliph anymore. We don't have this infallible leader. And the Rashidun Caliphate said that, no, we are the spiritual heirs and the authority of Allah on earth, the same as Muhammad. And now we have all of that authority. It's on us. Well, when the Umayyads come around, everybody hates the Umayyads' guts. They absolutely despise them, right? And the Umayyads said, we are the legitimate heirs of Uthman. That's what they were saying. And they kind of fought Ali from the beginning and wanted to exclude him completely and wanted to say, we're the next ones after him. We're the legitimate heirs of Uthman. We have this authority. But this early theology went away because of the hatred of the Umayyads. But this is one of the important things, that if all of this is a creation of the Abbasids, if the Abbasids are creating it, then they should have resuscitated, or at least said that the true belief is that they are the authentic representatives of Allah, the same way the Rashiduns were saying. But they didn't. They didn't try to turn the clock back or to fabricate, why this kind of, they created difficulties for themselves by assigning things that they relied on legally to Rashidun, while at the same time not having the same theology that the Rashidun Caliphate had. It's very, very difficult for them if that was what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and so Jack Gray says the real shady Shahada. So maybe we need the real Shahada to please stand up. I don't know. We'll see. But are you telling me that Sahih Bukhari #1 is a false hadith?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because I went through and I tried to find so all
But
the
it's
different
number
instances.
one.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I went through
Oh.
and I tried to find all the instances when people became Muslim. What did they do? What was described? There's the pledge at Aqaba. There's the second pledge at Aqaba, and it says what the texts were. What were the things that people were physically standing there saying? So I wanted to find. They did ascribe to Muhammad that you need to say the Shahada eventually. They ascribed that to him, but I could not find the instance of one single individual who said the modern Shahada in just those words and thus became part of Muhammad's Ummah.
In case people don't know,
yeah.
Saye Bukhari number one is all five of the 5 pillars of Islam, supposedly coming from Muhammad saying these are the 5 pillars. Legitimate question here from World Made by Physics. When did the pagans of the Kaaba stop circumambulating nude?
So supposedly not till Muhammad destroyed it. And it was only a subset. They came up with weird excuses for why women were circumambulating naked. And I think it really had more to do with specific fertility rites, and it was probably something that was done after dark. There are also very special benefits that you get from staying in a mosque overnight, from this remaining in a mosque. There's a special term for basically hanging out in a mosque overnight and staying there and sleeping there. Has all kinds of special benefits, more benefits than staying during the day. This also ties back to this moonness stuff. And so I think that it was more, they would say that, oh, these people didn't have access to the special clothing of ihram, so the women had to circumambulate nude. Well, why didn't any men do it? That's why I initially thought that it was entirely made up, because if it was just poor people, then both men and women would have to circulate with nothing on at all. But in reality, it's only women. What are they circumambulating for? It was probably some sort of weird fertility thing. It was probably a particular day after dark where the initiates into one particular subgroup, or they were at a time in their life when they particularly needed to invoke this power of the Kaaba for themselves or whatever, did it together for this one time once a year. So but that's the thing. You can't really say exactly why are they, who exactly is doing this, and why exactly are they doing it. There's lots of presupposition, because tons of different sources said they did it, and they would give different reasons as to why and when. And you have to, at this point, you kind of, if you're going to say why, you're making your own guesses, and the sources that you're using are clearly making guesses.
DS says, can Allah cover the balance of my mortgage? To which I say, you give and you watch what Allah does. David YouTube wants to know what happened to Daniel's sister.
So they were a non-observant Islamic family, and she was about 20 years old whenever she went out to a party house that had drugs, sex, booze, that sort of stuff. She died that night, almost certainly was murdered by the owner, who then proceeded to throw her into the ocean. Her body was never recovered, and he claimed that she just died of an overdose. And so he got rid of her, and so he was convicted and served a fairly small amount of time because they never recovered her body, but realistically, he assaulted her and murdered her on purpose. The idea that it was just an overdose is pretty ridiculous. And it was an awful, horrible, tragic occasion, and should not have happened, and he should not have gotten off nearly as lightly as he did. It was all awful and horrible. But Daniel seems to think that the entire reason that Islam was built because it understood that his sister would get uncontrollable lusts and would go to this house and get murdered by this man. And if only the second she showed signs of puberty, she had been assigned to a husband so that he would then have control over her and keep her locked up in her house and have sex with her, and she wouldn't be allowed to go to school anymore, then that would be so much better. And it's, and I talk about this publicly because he's addressed it publicly. But the fact that so much of his certainty that Islam is true comes from the idea that Islam is built to control the lusts of people and bottle them up and expend them in appropriate ways, And the fact that he said things like, the reason that children get molested is that they're not married off early enough because they feel lust, so they get molested. I mean, it's awful, awful the things he says, and it's all coming out of this terrible situation with a lot of tragedy and hurt. But his solution is no solution at all. It's obscenity.
Absolutely. So, reminder here: smash a law, like button. Wage crusade on the like button. Slightly beat the like button. Toothbrush on like button. Green skin colored like button. Aisha goat eat like button. Smash a law like button. So we're closing out now. I would appreciate it if you did remember to like this stream. It helps a little bit to spread it to additional viewers. So if you enjoyed today's show, be sure to hit like. Adnan says, good night, everyone, including Mary and Thaddeus. I appreciate you remembering me, unlike some of those other commenters. And Sam and Pat said, thanks, Thad. I enjoy your and Mary's calm look into history of what we know, what is written, and what is, I'm guessing, not written. You know, it says written twice. Thank you very much. Appreciate the encouragement. I'll be back on Thursday. We're having a bit of a different show on Thursday. We'll be doing a celebration of the Psalms. It'll be an open call-in show where people are invited to come up and talk about the Psalms of the Bible, which of course were songs. And we'll have a little bit of music to celebrate that as well. That'll be Thursday, 11 o'clock, I believe, a.m. Eastern time. So earlier than my normal streams because it's an international collaboration there. So agreed to an early time for that. Friday, we'll have Robert Spencer, Mary, your brother in Christ, and Christian hijab, and we'll be discussing Daniel Hikachu's theory that Islam is 5% violence. We're going to grant that because that's more than an hour of violence a day, which is quite a lot. And then we're going to figure out what the other 95% of Islam is. So that should be some good fun. I'll have my Bible study, of course, on Friday, and working on setting up some things for the weekend. Those are not finalized yet. And then what are we going to be talking about next Tuesday, Mary?
So I think that I do have more material on paganism and so on. I may skip it. I know, crazy, right? And just work in little pieces of it later. And I might go to Mecca itself, its founding, and what it was like. And a lot of the stuff builds into it because we talked about the Hums and the Hilla and all of these folks. And we need to kind of see how they played politically into the economic life of Mecca and what it was like and how many people there actually were there and what life was like there. So I think I may be done with paganism for now. I think I'll put up my slides that had other pagan stuff for people just to see. But I think that I'm going to put in, I'm just going to go straight to the founding of Mecca and that sort of stuff because I don't know how much more it would add.
All right. And as Una says, 7 dislikes from the Blackstone Kissers. Again, I appreciate when Muslims come in here and they dislike the stream. Part of how I understand whether a stream was good or not is how many dislikes it gets. More the better, because that means Muslims are telling me that this material bothers them. And you'll notice that the Muslims were interestingly silent. They've been mostly silent on these history streams, despite at least 7 of them tuning in, no doubt many more than 7, in fact, tuned in. They have no response to anything other than to silently hit a button. All I need to know about the destructive nature of this material, and I encourage people to keep that in mind. Take the material and use it. History is really hard for Muslims to answer because they're not familiar with this material. At least those involved in Dawah, maybe not Muslims in general, are familiar with criticisms like Islam is violent or Muhammad was a pedophile, perfectly valid criticisms, of course, but they're familiar with them. They know how to respond, or as they would say, refute you. But things like this, they have no clue about, and there really is no answer. I mean, what are they going to say? It was different when it was pagans doing the exact same things as Muhammad because they weren't the messenger of Allah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they can answer it, which is the point. So take it, use it in your conversations with Muslims. Until we meet again, God bless everyone. Go and serve the Lord.